There are moments in life that divide time into two parts: everything before and everything after. For Ethan Carter, that moment lasted less than 3 seconds. The sound of his hands striking the woman he loved echoed through a quiet bridal suite, drowning out the music waiting outside, silencing the laughter of nearly 200 wedding guests, and shattering a future they had spent 4 years building together. No one screamed, no one rushed toward them. The room simply froze. Emily Monroe didn't slap him back. She didn't cry. She didn't call him names. Instead, she slowly lifted her trembling fingers to her cheek, looked into the eyes of the man she had planned to spend the rest of her life with, and whispered 7 words that would haunt him for decades. "I don't know who you are anymore." Then she slipped her engagement ring from her finger, placed it gently on a nearby table, picked up the hem of her wedding dress, and walked away. That was the last time Ethan ever saw the woman he loved. Not because he stopped looking, but because some mistakes don't end relationships. They end the version of ourselves we thought we were. 22 years later, an elderly man stood alone beside a quiet lake in Chicago, holding a yellowed envelope that had never been opened. His hair had turned silver. The confidence that once filled his voice had been replaced by long silences. Deep lines marked a face shaped less by age than by regret. Inside the envelope was a letter written in elegant handwriting he would have recognized anywhere. Emily's. It had taken more than 2 decades to reach him. By then, it was already too late to answer. He stood staring across the calm water as the evening sun reflected like liquid gold across its surface. Around him, young couples laughed, children chased ducks along the shoreline, and photographers captured smiling brides dressed in white. Life had continued. Only his heart had remained trapped on a wedding day that never became a marriage. He closed his eyes. In an instant, he was no longer 75 years old. He was 33 again, standing in a bridal suite, watching the woman he loved disappear through a doorway, while his own heartbeat thundered louder than the applause that was supposed to celebrate their future. If he could relive one moment, just one, he already knew exactly which one he would choose. Not because he wanted another chance to marry Emily, because he wanted another chance to become the man she deserved before fear turned love into pain. But life doesn't grant us rehearsals, only consequences. And sometimes, the greatest punishment isn't losing someone you love. It's spending the rest of your life becoming the person you should have been when they needed you most. Before we uncover what really happened on that unforgettable wedding day, and why one terrible decision changed 2 lives forever, I want to welcome all our returning friends and everyone joining us for the first time. Welcome to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, where every story is more than romance. It's a journey through the choices we make, the lessons we learn, and the kind of people we become when life tests our hearts. If you've ever loved someone, if you've ever wished you could take back one sentence, one decision, or one moment, then this story may stay with you long after it ends. Take a moment to subscribe and join our growing family of storytellers and dreamers. Every subscription helps us continue bringing you heartfelt stories that entertain, inspire, and remind us that the greatest lessons in life often come from the moments we wish had never happened. And as you listen today, I want you to think about one question. Can a person truly change after causing the deepest pain to someone they love? Or are there some mistakes that deserve forgiveness, but never a second chance? Share your thoughts in the comments before we begin, because by the end of this story you may see love, regret, and redemption in an entirely different way. Now, let's go back to the morning when Ethan Carter believed he was about to marry the love of his life. He had no idea that before the sun set, he would lose her forever. The first rays of sunlight spilled across downtown Chicago, turning the glass walls of the Grand Harbor Hotel into sheets of gold. Inside the bridal suite on the 18th floor, laughter floated through the room like soft music. Someone was steaming the wedding dress. Someone else was arranging bouquets of white peonies and ivory roses. A makeup artist hummed quietly while carefully brushing the final touches across Emily Monroe's cheeks. From the outside, everything looked exactly as a wedding morning should. Calm, joyful, perfect. Emily sat before the large mirror, smiling whenever someone looked her way. But the moment she was left alone with her reflection, that smile faded. She studied the woman staring back at her. The dress was beautiful. The veil rested gently over her shoulders. Her hair framed her face exactly the way she had imagined since she was a little girl. Everything looked perfect. Everything. Except the uncertainty quietly growing inside her heart. Rachel, her maid of honor and best friend since college, noticed immediately. "You've been staring at that mirror for almost 5 minutes." Emily laughed softly. "Have the first?" Rachel nodded. "You've smiled for everyone else." She walked closer. "But not for yourself." Emily lowered her eyes. "I guess today just feels bigger than I imagined." Rachel smiled. "I think every bride feels that." "Maybe." Emily paused before adding quietly, or maybe every bride hopes she's making the right decision. Rachel didn't answer immediately. Instead, she sat beside her. You love Ethan. I do. He loves you. I know. So what's making you nervous? Emily looked toward the window overlooking the city. It's strange. What is? I've never questioned whether Ethan loves me. Rachel waited. I've only questioned whether he knows how. The room became quiet. Rachel had known both of them for years. She had watched their relationship grow from awkward coffee dates into weekend road trips, family holidays, late-night phone calls, and eventually a proposal beneath the Christmas lights at Millennium Park. Most people described them as the perfect couple. Rachel understood why. They rarely argued. They laughed together. They volunteered at the same community center. They remembered birthdays. They brought homemade meals to neighbors who were sick. From the outside, they were the kind of couple everyone admired. But close friends often notice what others miss. Rachel had seen moments Emily rarely talked about. Moments when Ethan became unusually anxious if Emily didn't answer her phone. Moments when he apologized repeatedly for things that weren't his fault. Moments when small disappointments affected him far more deeply than they should. He wasn't controlling. He wasn't cruel. He simply carried an invisible fear that seemed to follow him everywhere. What do you mean? Rachel finally asked. Emily folded her hands in her lap. I don't think Ethan realizes how afraid he is. Afraid of what? Losing people. Rachel nodded slowly. Have you talked to him about it? A few times. And? Emily smiled sadly. He always says he's fine. She looked back at the mirror. But people who are fine don't spend every day trying to convince themselves they won't be abandoned. Rachel reached over and squeezed her hand. Do you think you should postpone the wedding? Emily answered immediately. No. The certainty surprised even her. I love him. She smiled. I've never doubted that. She hesitated. I just hope marriage helps us grow together instead of hiding the things we still need to face. Across the hotel, Ethan Carter stood in front of another mirror. He adjusted his tie. Again. Then straightened his jacket. Again. His best man, Marcus Hill, leaned against the doorway with folded arms. If you touch that tie one more time, Marcus joked, it's going to file a complaint. Ethan laughed. You think it looks okay? It looked okay 20 minutes ago. What about now? Marcus shook his head. You know what's funny? What? You've managed million-dollar architectural projects. Ethan smiled. That's different. How? Buildings don't leave you. Marcus raised an eyebrow. That's an oddly specific answer. Ethan looked down. I didn't mean it like that. Marcus had known Ethan since they were 12 years old, long enough to recognize when his friend wasn't simply nervous. Something deeper was happening. You barely slept, did you? Ethan sighed. No. Worried? A little. Marcus stepped closer. Talk to me. Ethan remained silent for several seconds. Then he spoke so quietly, Marcus almost missed it. Do you ever wonder why good things make you nervous? Marcus frowned. What do you mean? The happier I get. Ethan searched for the words. The more I expect something terrible to happen. Marcus studied him. That wasn't wedding anxiety. That was something much older. You still think like that? I've tried not to. But, Ethan laughed bitterly, it never completely goes away. Marcus knew where it came from. Growing up, Ethan's home had been unpredictable. His father wasn't violent every day. That almost made it harder. Some mornings began with pancakes and laughter. Others began with criticism over the smallest mistakes. A broken glass, a poor grade, a forgotten chore. Affection could disappear without warning. As a child, Ethan learned a dangerous lesson. Love wasn't something you received. It was something you had to earn, every single day. And if you failed, you lost it. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. Emily isn't your father. I know. You don't have to earn her love. Ethan nodded. I know, but knowing something. He forced a smile. And believing it are different things. Marcus looked him straight in the eyes. Then let today be the day you finally believe it. Ethan smiled. I'll try. At that same moment, several floors below, the wedding guests were beginning to arrive. Friends embraced. Family members posed for photographs. Children chased each other through the elegant lobby until exhausted parents called them back. Near the entrance, 72-year-old Margaret Wilson watched everyone with a gentle smile. Margaret had known Emily since she was 10 years old. As Emily's former elementary school teacher, she had remained a cherished family friend. Standing beside her was Pastor David Reynolds, who would soon officiate the ceremony. Margaret smiled. They're a beautiful couple. They are, Pastor David agreed. She looked thoughtfully toward the ballroom. I only hope they remember something. What is that? The wedding lasts one day. She smiled warmly. The marriage begins the day after. Pastor David nodded. So many couples spend years planning a wedding. And so little time preparing for marriage. Margaret chuckled softly. The strongest marriages aren't built on perfect days. They're built on ordinary days. The days when forgiveness matters more than flowers. When patience matters more than photographs. When listening matters more than winning. Nearby, a young engaged couple waiting for the ceremony overheard the conversation. The bride-to-be whispered to her fiancé, I hope we're still holding hands 30 years from now. He smiled. We will. Margaret overheard them and smiled kindly. Hold more than hands. The couple turned toward her. Hold respect. Hold kindness. Hold your words carefully. Because the words spoken in anger often remain long after the anger has disappeared. Neither young person realized how profoundly those words would echo before the day was over. Sometimes life's greatest lessons arrive quietly. Long before anyone realizes, they will soon need them. As the morning moved closer to noon, the hotel became busier. Photographers carried cameras from room to room. Florists adjusted centerpieces one last time. The string quartet rehearsed the opening notes of Canon in D inside the ballroom. Everything was unfolding exactly according to schedule. Everything except the quiet conversations taking place behind closed doors. In the bridal suite, Emily stood by the window, looking down at the bustling streets below. Chicago had always been her favorite city. It wasn't because of the towering buildings or the famous skyline. It was because the city reminded her that people from different backgrounds could build something beautiful together. She hoped marriage would be the same. Rachel walked over and handed her a small photo album. I found this in your overnight bag. Emily smiled the moment she recognized it. Our first road trip. Rachel laughed. You two looked like kids. We were. Emily opened the album. There was a picture of Ethan trying to cook breakfast over a tiny camping stove. Another showed both of them soaked from an unexpected rainstorm, laughing so hard they could barely stand. Rachel flipped another page. This one is my favorite. It was a photograph taken on a quiet beach in Michigan. No expensive clothes. No perfect poses. Just Ethan, looking at Emily while she stared at the sunset, completely unaware that someone had captured the moment. He always looked at you like that, Rachel said. Emily nodded. He made me feel seen. She paused. And that's why the hard moments confused me. Rachel listened carefully. There were days when he trusted me completely. Emily turned another page. And there were days when one unanswered phone call made him believe something terrible had happened. I kept telling him that silence doesn't always mean rejection. She sighed. But fear doesn't always listen to reason. Rachel gently closed the album. Did he ever scare you? Emily answered honestly. No. Did he ever threaten you? Never. So why are you worried? Emily thought for a long moment. Because love isn't only about what someone has done. It's also about what they're capable of becoming if they never face the parts of themselves they're hiding from. Rachel absorbed those words. They didn't sound like a bride doubting her future. They sounded like a woman who deeply understood the man she loved. Across the hall, Ethan sat alone for a few minutes after Marcus stepped out to greet arriving relatives. The silence gave his mind room to wander. His eyes settled on the small leather notebook resting on the table. Emily had given it to him on his birthday 2 years earlier. The first page contained a handwritten note. For all the dreams you haven't built yet, and for the man you're still becoming. Love, Emily. He smiled. She had always believed in the version of him that he struggled to see. He flipped through the notebook. Most pages contained rough sketches of buildings, ideas, goals, dreams. Near the back was another page written entirely in Emily's handwriting. He had forgotten it was there. Promise me something. When life becomes difficult, don't try to solve every problem alone. Talk to me. Marriage isn't two people carrying separate burdens. It's two people carrying one another when life becomes heavy. He traced the words with his thumb. Emily had written them after he spent 3 exhausting months managing a demanding project without telling anyone how overwhelmed he felt. When the project ended, he had broken down in tears. Not because of work, because he had been carrying everything alone. Emily hadn't judged him. She had simply sat beside him until he found the courage to speak. That was her gift. She made honesty feel safe. Yet even now, even on their wedding day, there were parts of himself he had never fully shared, parts he barely understood. Downstairs, Pastor David gathered the wedding party for a brief moment before guests took their seats. I won't keep you long, he said with a smile. I simply want to remind everyone why we're here. The room quieted. A wedding celebrates love. But marriage depends on choices. He looked around the room. Every married couple eventually discovers something. You don't fall in love only once. You choose love again and again. You choose patience. You choose humility. You choose forgiveness. You choose to listen when it's easier to defend yourself. He smiled warmly. The happiest couples I've known weren't those who avoided problems. They were the ones who learned how to face problems together. Several guests nodded thoughtfully. Marcus glanced toward Ethan. Those words seemed to settle something inside his friend. For a brief moment, Ethan felt lighter. Perhaps today truly was the beginning of something beautiful. Meanwhile, Emily's mother, Linda Monroe, finished helping her younger daughter pin a corsage onto her dress. Linda's smile carried the calm confidence of a woman who had weathered life's storms. Emily entered the room. For a few seconds, mother and daughter simply looked at one another. Then, Linda's eyes filled with tears. "My little girl." Emily laughed. "I think I'm supposed to be the one crying." "Oh, don't worry." Linda smiled through her tears. "You'll get your turn." The room laughed. After everyone stepped outside to give them a private moment, Linda gently held Emily's hands. "I want to tell you something my grandmother told me on my wedding day." Emily listened closely. "Never measure a marriage by how often you agree." She paused. "Measure it by how safely you can disagree." Emily tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Linda smiled. "Anyone can be kind when life is easy. But when disappointment comes, when fear comes, when misunderstandings come, pay attention to how you treat one another." She squeezed Emily's hands. "Respect during conflict is one of love's greatest tests." Emily hugged her tightly. "I'll remember that." Neither of them realized how soon those words would become painfully important. As the afternoon approached, guests filled the ballroom. Soft music drifted through the air. Children whispered. Camera flashes sparkled like tiny stars. The atmosphere felt joyful, hopeful, full of promise. Outside the ballroom doors, Ethan waited with Marcus. "You ready?" Marcus asked. Ethan smiled. "I've never been more ready for anything." At almost the exact same moment, Emily stood at the opposite end of the hallway with her father. He offered his arm. "You okay?" She smiled warmly. "I am. You know." Her father chuckled. "I've practiced letting go since the day you learned to walk." Emily laughed. "But somehow this feels harder." She kissed his cheek. "You'll never be letting me go. You'll just be walking beside us in a different way." He smiled proudly. "Your mother and I tried to teach you what love looks like." Emily nodded. "You did. And today." She looked toward the ballroom doors. "I hope Ethan and I keep learning." A wedding coordinator hurried toward them with a reassuring smile. 5 minutes. Emily took one slow breath. 5 minutes. 5 minutes until she would walk down the aisle. 5 minutes until their new life together would begin. She reached into her bouquet and touched the folded note Ethan had written her the night before. "No matter what tomorrow brings, I'm grateful it brings you." She smiled. Neither of them knew that life has a way of testing our words before it allows us to live them. Sometimes, the greatest promises are not made at the altar. They are made in the ordinary moments that follow. And sometimes, before two hearts can be joined forever, life asks one final question, not to punish them, but to reveal whether the foundation beneath their love is truly strong enough to carry the weight of what comes next. Just then, a sharp vibration broke the quiet. Emily's phone lit up on the dressing table. The caller ID showed her younger sister's name. She almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, she answered. Within seconds, the color drained from her face. The bouquet slipped from her trembling hands and scattered white petals across the floor. Rachel rushed forward. "Emily, what happened?" Emily looked up, tears filling her eyes before she could even find the words. "My mom." She struggled to breathe. She just collapsed. "Before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever looked at a couple and thought they had the perfect relationship, only to discover they were quietly carrying struggles no one else could see? Real love isn't about having a perfect wedding or a perfect life. It's about how we treat each other when life suddenly stops going according to plan. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What do you think makes a marriage strong enough to survive life's unexpected storms? Love, trust, communication, forgiveness, or something else? If this story is already touching your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story filled with powerful life lessons and unforgettable characters. Now, let's continue. because neither Ethan nor Emily realizes that the next few moments will change the course of their lives forever. For a few terrifying seconds, Emily couldn't hear anything except the sound of her own heartbeat. The room around her blurred. Rachel caught her by the shoulders before she could lose her balance. "Emily, talk to me." Emily's younger sister Hannah was crying so hard that her words came in broken pieces. "Mom, she collapsed in the hotel lobby." Emily's eyes widened. "What?" "They think it's her heart. The paramedics are here." Emily didn't wait for another explanation. "I'm coming." She ended the call, gathered the front of her wedding dress, and rushed toward the door. Rachel followed close behind. The hallway that had been filled with excitement only moments earlier suddenly felt painfully quiet. As they reached the elevators, they found several hotel employees speaking urgently into radios. One of them recognized Emily immediately. "Miss Monroe, where's my mother?" "They've taken her to the ambulance." Emily pressed the elevator button repeatedly. "Please." The doors finally opened. By the time she reached the hotel entrance, flashing emergency lights painted the elegant building in shades of red and blue. Guests stood frozen on the sidewalk. Some whispered, others prayed. Emily pushed through the crowd. "Mom!" Linda Monroe was lying on a stretcher, while paramedics worked quickly around her. An oxygen mask covered her face. Monitors beeped steadily. Emily reached for her mother's hand. "Mom!" Linda slowly opened her eyes. She tried to smile beneath the mask. One of the paramedics spoke gently. "We need to transport her immediately." Emily nodded without hesitation. "I'm coming with you." Just as she turned toward the ambulance, another voice called her name. "Emily!" She looked back. Ethan was running across the sidewalk, still wearing his tuxedo. Behind him came Marcus, Pastor David, and several worried family members. "What happened?" Ethan asked, breathing hard. Emily could barely speak. "They think it's her heart." Without thinking, Ethan wrapped his arms around her. "I'm so sorry." For several seconds, neither of them said another word. Then Emily whispered, "I'm going to the hospital." "Of course. We'll postpone everything." She nodded, expecting the conversation to end there. But within moments, relatives from both families began gathering around them. Confusion spread faster than facts. "Has anyone spoken to the doctors? Can the ceremony just be delayed? What about all the guests? Should someone make an announcement?" Questions came from every direction. No one intended to be insensitive. People simply reacted differently under pressure. Emily felt overwhelmed. Pastor David gently stepped forward. "Everyone, please give them some space." The crowd quieted. Ethan looked at Emily. "We'll figure this out." She squeezed his hand. "I know." For one brief moment, they were completely united. Fear had stripped away every distraction. Only love remained. Or so it seemed. Across the street, Ethan's father, Richard Carter, stood watching the growing commotion. He frowned. "This can't be happening." His wife glanced at him. "Richard, we've spent nearly a year planning this." She looked at him in disbelief. "Emily's mother may be dying." "I understand that." His voice softened, though concern still clouded his face. "But there are 200 guests here. The reception, the vendors, the church, the families." His wife sighed quietly. "None of that matters right now." Richard folded his arms. "It matters eventually." Marcus happened to overhear the conversation. He chose not to respond. Instead, he silently prayed Ethan wouldn't hear those words. Unfortunately, a few minutes later, Richard pulled his son aside. "Ethan, what? You need to think clearly. My future mother-in-law is in an ambulance." "I know. But panic helps no one." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying don't make permanent decisions until you know exactly what's happening." Ethan stared at him. "She's going to the hospital." "I'm aware." Richard lowered his voice. "If the doctors stabilize her, perhaps the ceremony could simply be postponed a few hours." Ethan didn't answer. His father's words echoed somewhere deep inside him. The part of him that had always been taught to solve problems quickly, to keep everything under control, to avoid public embarrassment. He hated that those thoughts even entered his mind. Yet, once planted, they refused to disappear. Meanwhile, inside the ambulance, Emily held her mother's hand as sirens echoed through downtown Chicago. Linda opened her eyes briefly. "Emily." "I'm here." "You should." Linda struggled for breath. "Be getting married." Emily shook her head immediately. "Nothing matters more than you." A faint smile appeared beneath the oxygen mask. "My sweet girl." Emily fought back tears. "You've spent your whole life teaching me what love looks like." She kissed her mother's forehead. "Now, let me show you what you taught me." The paramedic sitting opposite them smiled quietly. After years in emergency medicine, he had learned something many people never did. Real love often revealed itself in hospital rooms, not ballrooms. Back at the hotel, guests remained seated in uncertainty. Some checked their watches, others prayed silently. The musicians stopped playing. Conversations became whispers. Pastor David finally stepped onto the small stage. "Ladies and gentlemen." His calm voice filled the room. "Emily's mother has experienced a medical emergency." A wave of concern swept through the audience. "We ask for your prayers, as the family receives more information. No decisions have been made yet regarding today's ceremony. I know many of you traveled great distances to celebrate with Ethan and Emily. But today reminds us of something far more important." He paused. "Life rarely follows our carefully written schedules. What matters most is how we love one another when those schedules fall apart." The ballroom became completely silent. Some guests lowered their heads in prayer. Others quietly wiped away tears. No one complained. Not one. Because in moments like these, flowers, photographs, and perfect timelines suddenly became very small things. 40 minutes later, Ethan finally arrived at the hospital with Marcus. He spotted Emily sitting alone in the waiting area. Her veil had been removed. Her makeup had begun to fade beneath quiet tears. Yet, when she saw him, she stood and walked straight into his arms. Neither of them spoke. Sometimes, love doesn't need words. It simply needs someone willing to stay. Marcus watched from a respectful distance. He smiled. Maybe this terrible day would become the first great test of their marriage. Maybe they would face it together. Maybe. Neither of them knew that the greatest danger was not waiting inside the emergency room. It was quietly growing inside Ethan's own heart. Not anger, not hatred, but fear. Fear has a strange way of disguising itself. Sometimes it looks like worry. Sometimes it sounds like logic. And if left unexamined, it can slowly convince a good person to make an unforgettable mistake. Outside the waiting room windows, dark clouds gathered over the Chicago skyline. The storm had not yet begun, but it was coming. The waiting room felt strangely suspended in time. A television mounted in the corner played a daytime talk show with the volume turned down. Nurses hurried past carrying charts. Every few minutes, another family was called through the double doors. But for Ethan and Emily, time refused to move. Emily sat with her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Ethan reached over and gently unfolded her fingers. "You're going to hurt your hands." She looked at him with tired eyes and managed a faint smile. "I didn't even realize I was doing that." He rested his hand over hers. "We're going to get through this." She nodded. "I hope so." Several minutes later, a cardiologist stepped into the waiting room. "Family of Linda Monroe?" Everyone stood at once. The doctor smiled reassuringly. "She's stable." A collective sigh swept through the room. The episode was serious, but we were able to treat her quickly. "We'll need to keep her for observation and run additional tests." Emily covered her face as tears of relief streamed down her cheeks. "Can I see her?" "In a few minutes." The doctor looked around, one visitor at a time. As he disappeared back through the doors, the tension in the room eased for the first time that afternoon. Emily turned toward Ethan. "Thank God!" He pulled her into a gentle embrace. For a brief moment, everything else disappeared. No wedding, no guests, no decorations, only gratitude. While Emily was with her mother, Ethan stepped into the hallway to get some fresh air. Marcus joined him. "You okay?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "I think so. You did the right thing by coming here. I couldn't have been anywhere else." Marcus smiled. "That's the answer I was hoping to hear." They stood in silence until Ethan's phone vibrated. His father's name appeared on the screen. Ethan hesitated before answering. "Dad, how is she?" "Stable." "That's good news." "It is." There was a pause. "So..." Oh, Ethan already knew what was coming. "The guests are still waiting." He closed his eyes. Dad, I'm only asking because people need direction. The vendors are asking questions. The hotel manager is asking questions. The families are asking questions." Ethan leaned against the wall. "I don't know what we're doing yet." Richard's voice remained calm. "Maybe now that she's stable, the ceremony could continue later this evening." Ethan didn't respond. "I'm not saying anyone should ignore what happened," Richard continued. "But postponing for a few hours may save everyone a lot of disappointment." After hanging up, Ethan stared silently at the floor. Marcus had heard enough to understand the conversation. "What are you thinking?" "I don't know." Marcus folded his arms. Then don't make a decision until you do. Inside Linda's hospital room, Emily sat beside her mother's bed. Linda looked tired, but her smile remained gentle. You should be wearing that beautiful dress somewhere else. Emily shook her head. I'd rather be here. Linda squeezed her daughter's hand. My sweetheart. I'm serious. Emily smiled through tears. You've spent 31 years showing up for me. This is where I belong. Linda looked at her with quiet pride. You know what makes a marriage last? Emily smiled. I thought you already gave me your advice this morning. I forgot one thing. What? Linda spoke softly. Never make important decisions while your heart is ruled by fear. Emily listened carefully. Fear makes us hear words that were never spoken. It makes us imagine endings that haven't happened. It convinces us to protect ourselves instead of understanding each other. She paused to catch her breath. If you remember that, you'll save yourself from many regrets. Emily kissed her mother's forehead. I'll remember. Neither woman knew how desperately those words would soon be needed. As evening approached, several family members gathered in a quiet conference room to discuss the wedding. Some believed it should simply be postponed. Others suggested cancelling it entirely. No one wanted to pressure Ethan or Emily. Everyone wanted what they believed was best. Pastor David listened more than he spoke. Finally, someone asked him directly, "What would you do?" He smiled gently. "I wouldn't decide today." The room grew quiet. When people experience fear, grief or shock, their emotions become louder than their wisdom. He looked around the table. A marriage deserves decisions made from peace, not panic. His words settled over the room like a calm breeze. Later that evening, Ethan found Emily sitting alone in the hospital chapel. The stained glass windows glowed softly in the fading sunlight. He sat beside her. Neither spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Emily broke the silence. I've been thinking. So have I. She looked at him. I don't want to stand in front of everyone tomorrow pretending today didn't happen. He nodded. I understand. She searched for the right words. We should postpone the wedding. Ethan looked down at the wooden pew. Every logical part of him knew she was right. Yet somewhere deep inside, another voice whispered different questions. What if postponing becomes cancelling? What if everything starts falling apart? What if she changes her mind? He hated those thoughts. He knew they weren't fair. But fear rarely asks permission before entering the mind. Emily noticed his silence. What are you thinking? He forced a small smile. I'm trying to process everything. She reached for his hand. We'll get through this. He squeezed her fingers. I know. He wanted to believe it. More than anything. That night, long after most visitors had gone home, Ethan stood alone outside the hospital entrance. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement after a light summer rain. Marcus walked out, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Ethan. You've barely said a word. I'm tired. Marcus nodded. So is everyone. Ethan stared into the distance. You know what scares me? What? Today reminded me how quickly everything can change. Marcus took a slow sip of coffee. That's true. But it also reminded me how important it is to choose people over plans. Ethan remained silent. Marcus continued. A wedding can always be rescheduled. A life can't. Those words stayed with Ethan long after Marcus walked away. He wanted to believe them completely. But deep inside, another battle had already begun. One voice urged patience. The other demanded certainty. He didn't yet realize that the greatest battles are rarely fought between 2 people. They're fought within one heart. And unless that battle is won, the people we love often become the ones who suffer the consequences. Tomorrow would not test Ethan's love for Emily. It would test whether love was stronger than fear. And not every heart passes that test the first time. The next morning arrived without celebration. Sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, but no one noticed how beautiful the day was. Instead of waking up in a honeymoon suite, Ethan woke on an uncomfortable chair in the family waiting room. His tuxedo jacket was folded beneath his head. His tie had long since been removed. He blinked several times, trying to remember where he was. Then reality settled over him once more. The wedding, Emily, the hospital, Linda, none of it had been a nightmare. Marcus, who had stayed through the night, stretched his arms as Ethan stood. You should get some breakfast. I'm not hungry. You haven't eaten since yesterday morning. I said, I'm not hungry. Marcus didn't argue. He simply handed Ethan a bottle of water. Then at least drink. Ethan accepted it with a grateful nod. Sometimes friendship wasn't about finding the right words. Sometimes it was about quietly staying. Down the hall, Emily sat beside her mother's bed, watching the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. Linda looked much stronger than she had the day before. The color had begun returning to her face. "You should go home and rest," Linda said softly. Emily smiled. "You've been trying to get rid of me for 12 hours. Linda laughed quietly. "I'm your mother. I'm supposed to worry about you." Emily reached over and tucked the blanket around her. "And I'm your daughter. So today, I'm worrying about you." Linda's smile faded into thoughtful silence. "Emily, can I ask you something? Anything. If yesterday hadn't happened, if there had been no ambulance, no hospital, no emergency, Satine, would you still have walked down that aisle with complete peace in your heart?" Emily looked down at her hands. The question lingered between them. Finally, she answered honestly. "I would have walked. But," Emily sighed, "I also knew Ethan still had parts of himself he was afraid to face." Linda nodded slowly. "Did that make you love him less?" "No. It made me want him to heal." She paused. "I just don't know whether someone can heal if they refuse to admit they're hurting." Linda gently squeezed her daughter's hand. "The hardest battles are often the invisible ones." Later that morning, Pastor David arrived carrying a small paper bag. "I brought muffins." Emily smiled. "I think you're the only pastor I know who believes blueberry muffins solve emotional crises." "They don't." He grinned. "But hungry people rarely make wise decisions." Emily laughed for the first time since the previous afternoon. After a few moments, Pastor David became more serious. "I spoke with the hotel. And they're willing to work with you." Emily looked surprised. "They are?" "They've offered to postpone the reception to another date." A wave of relief crossed her face. "That's incredibly kind. They said some moments matter more than contracts." Emily lowered her eyes. "I wish more people believed that." Pastor David waited before asking gently, "Have you and Ethan talked about what comes next?" "Not really. Do you want to?" "I do." She looked toward the hospital window. "But I don't want fear to make the decision for us." Pastor David smiled warmly. "Then don't rush. The healthiest relationships don't fear difficult conversations. They welcome them." At nearly the same time, Ethan found himself sitting alone in the hospital cafeteria. His untouched breakfast sat in front of him. Across the room, he watched an elderly couple sharing a single bowl of soup. The husband carefully stirred it before placing the spoon into his wife's hand. She smiled at him with the kind of quiet affection that only years could build. Ethan couldn't stop watching them. An older man noticed his curiosity and smiled. 48 years. Ethan blinked. "I'm sorry?" The man chuckled. "We've been married 48 years. He glanced toward his wife. "She still insists soup tastes better when we share it." Ethan smiled politely. "That's wonderful." The man studied him for a moment. "Tough day?" Ethan nodded. "I was supposed to get married yesterday." The man's expression softened. "What happened?" "My fiancé's mother had a medical emergency." "I'm sorry." "So am I." There was a brief silence before the older man asked, "Can I tell you something I wish someone had told me when I was your age?" Ethan nodded. "When you're frightened, don't confuse urgency with importance." Ethan frowned slightly. "I don't understand." The man leaned back. "When we're afraid, we suddenly believe every decision has to be made immediately. But most important decisions, they can wait until fear leaves the room." He smiled kindly. "If I'd learned that earlier, I would have saved my wife and myself many unnecessary arguments." Those words settled heavily in Ethan's heart. He thanked the man before returning upstairs. Yet, even as he walked away, part of him still struggled to silence the anxious voice inside his mind. By early afternoon, Linda had been moved to a regular hospital room. Doctors were optimistic. The immediate danger had passed. The family gathered together with visible relief. For the first time since the wedding had been interrupted, conversation began returning to normal. Emily's father even managed a joke that made everyone laugh. Hope slowly filled the room. Seeing everyone smiling again, Ethan felt something loosen inside his chest. Maybe they truly could move forward. Maybe this painful interruption would eventually become just another story they told their grandchildren someday. He looked across the room. Emily caught his eye and smiled. The smile wasn't as carefree as it had been the morning before, but it was real. He walked over to her. "Can we talk?" She nodded. Together, they stepped into the quiet hallway. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "I've been thinking about what Pastor David said." "So have I. I don't think we should choose another wedding date today." Ethan listened carefully. "I think we should go home. Rest, take care of Mum, and give ourselves a little time." He nodded slowly. That makes sense. She reached for his hand. I don't want our marriage to begin in the middle of fear. He looked into her eyes. Every word she said was thoughtful, reasonable, loving, and yet, without warning, a familiar knot began tightening in his stomach. A tiny whisper entered his thoughts. What if time changes everything? What if she realizes she doesn't need you? What if postponing becomes forever? He hated that voice. He wished he could silence it. Instead, he smiled. I understand. Emily leaned her head gently against his shoulder. Thank you. For a moment, the fear disappeared. But it wasn't gone. It was only waiting. Waiting for the right moment. To convince him that protecting love and controlling it were somehow the same thing. By late afternoon, the doctors were optimistic. Linda would remain in the hospital for a few more days, but the danger had passed. For the first time in nearly 24 hours, both families allowed themselves to breathe. Emily stepped out of her mother's room carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Ethan. I figured you still haven't eaten. He smiled faintly. You know me too well. I've been trying to. They walked slowly down the hallway until they reached a quiet seating area overlooking the city. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was tired, honest. Emily stared out the window. I've been thinking about yesterday. So have I, Ethan replied. I don't want us to pretend it never happened. We won't. She nodded. I think we should postpone the wedding for a while. Ethan looked at her carefully. A while? I don't know how long. She met his eyes. I want Mom to recover. I want both of us to breathe. And? She hesitated. I want us to start our marriage because we're emotionally ready, not because we've already planned the party. Ethan understood every word she was saying. Logically, she was right. Emotionally, his heart was hearing something entirely different. Not, let's wait. But, I'm pulling away. Not, let's become stronger. But, maybe I don't want this anymore. He knew those thoughts weren't fair. He even knew they weren't true. Yet they felt real. Fear has a way of making imagined dangers feel more convincing than spoken truth. Emily noticed his expression. What are you thinking? He looked away. I'm trying to understand. Then ask me. What if... He struggled to continue. What if postponing changes everything? Emily answered gently. If our relationship can survive difficult conversations, it'll survive postponing a wedding. And if it can't... She stopped herself. Ethan noticed. If it can't... What? Emily sighed. Then postponing isn't what broke us. His stomach tightened. She wasn't threatening him. She was speaking honestly. But honesty often sounds frightening to people who expect abandonment. That evening, the families returned briefly to the hotel to collect personal belongings before checking out. The ballroom remained almost exactly as it had been the previous day. Rows of white chairs, fresh flowers, untouched place settings. The wedding cake still stood beneath its glass cover. It looked as though time itself had stopped. Emily walked slowly through the empty room. It feels strange. Ethan nodded. It really does. She smiled sadly. You know what I realized? What? I don't miss the ceremony. He looked at her. I miss the feeling we had before fear entered the room. Those words settled heavily between them. They wandered toward the bridal suite to collect a few remaining bags. The room was quiet now. The laughter from the previous morning had been replaced by silence. Emily removed a small jewelry box from the dresser. I'll come back for the rest later. Ethan stood near the doorway. His thoughts refused to settle. Questions kept circling inside him. How long would they wait? Would people begin talking? Would she eventually decide not to marry him at all? He hated himself for thinking about those things while her mother was recovering. Yet the thoughts kept returning. Emily noticed his silence. You've been somewhere else all day. I'm here. No. She walked closer. Your body is here. But your mind isn't. He forced a smile. I'm just exhausted. She nodded. So am I. She reached for his hand. I need you to trust me. I do. She looked at him with quiet compassion. Ethan. Oh, you don't have to tell me what you think I want to hear. You can tell me the truth. He hesitated. I'm scared. I know. I'm afraid this changes everything. Emily gently squeezed his hand. It changes our wedding date. It doesn't change how I feel about you. But what if it does later? She looked at him with surprise. Why would you believe that? Because people change. Yes, they do. She smiled softly. And I hope we do. I hope we become wiser, more patient, better listeners. She paused. I don't want us to stay exactly as we are forever. I want us to grow. Instead of bringing comfort, those words awakened something buried deep inside him. Growing, changing, becoming different. Somewhere in his childhood, those words had always meant one thing. Someone is leaving. His breathing became shallow. Emily noticed immediately. Hey! She stepped closer. Look at me. He did. I need a little space tonight. She spoke calmly. I'm emotionally exhausted. I want to go back to the hospital with my family. I want you to go home and get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll talk again with clear minds. The request was reasonable, healthy, compassionate, but fear translated it into something else. Space, distance, separation, loss. A lifetime of old wounds suddenly shouted louder than the woman standing in front of him. So, he asked quietly, you're walking away? Emily blinked. No. I'm asking for one night. So you can think. So we both can think. So you can decide whether you still want this. She stared at him. Ethan. That's not what I said. No. It's what you heard. Tears gathered in her eyes. I'm trying to protect our future. I'm trying to protect us. His voice became strained. I've already lost yesterday. I can't lose you, too. You aren't losing me. Then don't leave. I need tonight. No. I need you to trust me. The room fell silent. Emily took one slow breath. She spoke with kindness. I love you. I've loved you through your fears. I've loved you through your doubts. But I cannot spend the rest of my life proving that I'm not leaving every time you're afraid. Those words weren't meant to wound him. They were an invitation to face the fear, instead of asking her to carry it. For one heartbreaking instant, he stood at a crossroads. One path required vulnerability. I know this fear isn't about you. The other demanded control. Don't leave. His heart raced, his thoughts blurred. Without fully thinking, he reached out. His open hand struck her across the cheek. The sound was soft. The silence that followed was deafening. Everything stopped. Ethan stared at his own hand, as if it belonged to someone else. His face drained of color. Emily slowly lifted her fingers to her cheek. There was no anger in her eyes, only disbelief and profound sorrow. The kind of sorrow that comes when someone you trusted crosses a line you never imagined they would. A tear rolled down her face. Not because the blow had been hard, but because the trust between them had shattered. She looked at him for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice barely rose above a whisper. I don't know who you are anymore. Those 7 words pierced deeper than any shout could have. Emily. His voice cracked. He couldn't finish. No apology seemed large enough. No explanation seemed worthy. Emily quietly removed her engagement ring. She placed it on the small wooden table beside the window. Not dramatically, not angrily, simply, deliberately. She looked at the ring one last time, then back at Ethan. I hope one day, she said through tears, you become the man I always believed you could be. She picked up her overnight bag, walked past him, and left the room. Ethan didn't follow. He couldn't move. Because in that instant, he understood a truth that would shape the rest of his life. Love is not destroyed only by hatred. Sometimes it is destroyed by one moment of fear left unchallenged. He sank into the chair beside the window, buried his face in his hands, and wept. Outside, hotel staff quietly began removing the wedding flowers. Inside, the future they had imagined together had already slipped beyond reach. That evening would become the day Ethan returned to therapy. Not to win Emily back, but to understand the frightened man he had allowed to make a devastating choice. And it would become the day Emily chose something equally difficult. She chose to believe that forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same. Sometimes the healthiest act of love is refusing to accept what should never have happened. The sound of the closing door echoed through the empty bridal suite long after Emily was gone. Ethan remained exactly where he stood. His eyes never left the engagement ring resting on the small wooden table. Only a few minutes earlier, that ring had represented a lifetime of promises. Now it represented the exact moment trust had been broken. His knees weakened. He slowly lowered himself into a nearby chair and buried his face in his hands. The silence around him felt heavier than any shouting ever could. He replayed the last few seconds over and over again. Emily, asking for space, her calm voice, her tear-filled eyes, his fear, his choice. The sound, then her words. I don't know who you are anymore. Those words echoed louder than the slap itself. A gentle knock came at the door. "Ethan?" It was Marcus. Receiving no answer, he slowly opened it. His smile disappeared immediately. The untouched wedding jacket lay across a chair. The engagement ring rested on the table. Ethan sat motionless. Marcus looked around the room. "Where's Emily?" Ethan didn't answer. Marcus walked closer. "Ethan?" Finally, Ethan whispered, "She's gone." Marcus frowned. "What happened?" Another long silence. Then 4 words that barely escaped Ethan's lips. "I slapped her." Marcus froze. He stared at his lifelong friend, convinced he had misheard. "You... what?" Ethan couldn't lift his head. "I slapped her." The room became unbearably still. Marcus had known Ethan for more than 20 years. He had defended him countless times whenever people misunderstood his quiet personality. He had trusted him completely. Never, not once, had he imagined hearing those words. Marcus closed the door behind him. His voice remained calm, but his disappointment was impossible to hide. "Tell me exactly what happened." Ethan explained everything, not to excuse himself, not to justify it, simply because the truth deserved to be spoken honestly. When he finished, Marcus sat across from him. "I've spent years telling people what kind of man you are." "So have I." Ethan looked at his trembling hands. "And today, I became someone I don't even recognize." Marcus leaned forward. "Listen to me carefully." Ethan looked up. "What happened isn't defined by whether you intended it. It's defined by what you chose." Tears filled Ethan's eyes. "I know." "No." Marcus shook his head gently. "I don't think you do. You keep talking about fear. But fear didn't make the decision." "You did." The words hurt, because they were true. Marcus continued quietly. "The moment we blame our emotions instead of our choices, we stop growing." Ethan lowered his head again. "I've ruined everything." Marcus remained silent for several moments. Then he answered honestly, "You've done something that caused deep harm. Now your life will be defined by what you choose to do next." Downstairs, guests had already begun leaving the ballroom. The musicians quietly packed away their instruments. Florists removed arrangements that had taken months to plan. Wedding staff carefully boxed untouched centerpieces. No one complained. No one blamed anyone. Instead, conversations were filled with sadness. "I feel so sorry for them. I hope Emily's mother recovers." What a heartbreaking day. Many guests would never know the full truth. Some would believe the wedding had simply been cancelled because of the medical emergency. Others sensed there was more to the story. Only a handful of people knew what had actually happened. And those who knew understood something important. Real pain rarely needs an audience. At the hospital, Emily sat quietly beside her mother's bed. She had washed away the makeup that tears had ruined. The mark on her cheek had already begun to fade. The wound inside her heart had not. Linda studied her daughter's face carefully. "My sweetheart." Emily tried to smile. "I'm okay." Linda reached for her hand. "You don't have to protect me." Emily looked away. "I don't even know how to explain what happened." "You don't have to." Emily blinked in surprise. Her mother continued softly. "Sometimes people reveal their deepest struggles in their worst moments." Emily's eyes filled again. "I loved him, Mom." "I know. I still care about him." "I know. But I don't know if I can ever feel safe with him again." Linda gently squeezed her daughter's hand. "My dear, love should never require you to negotiate your safety." Those words settled deep inside Emily's heart. Linda wasn't telling her what decision to make. She was reminding her what healthy love should never cost. After a few moments, Emily asked quietly, "Does choosing myself mean I didn't love him enough?" Linda shook her head immediately. "No. It means you finally loved yourself enough." Emily closed her eyes as tears slipped silently down her cheeks. For the first time since leaving the hotel, she allowed herself to grieve, not only the wedding, but the future she had imagined. Later that evening, Pastor David found Ethan sitting alone in the empty ballroom. Most of the decorations had already been removed. Only scattered flower petals remained across the polished floor. Pastor David sat beside him without speaking. Several minutes passed. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me." Pastor David nodded slowly. "You caused deep pain." "I don't expect forgiveness." The pastor looked at him. "What do you expect?" "I don't know. I only know I wish I could go back." Pastor David sighed. "Regret has a purpose." Ethan looked up. "It reminds us where we must never return." He paused before continuing. "But regret alone changes nothing. Only responsibility leads to transformation." Ethan whispered, What if she never speaks to me again? Pastor David answered with painful honesty. That may be the consequence you must accept. Ethan lowered his head. And if it is? Your responsibility is still the same. Become the man who would never make that choice again. Not because Emily might return, not because anyone was watching, but because character is built in the quiet moments after failure. That night, Ethan drove home alone. For the first time in years, the apartment felt unfamiliar. Emily's favorite mug still sat in the kitchen. A small blanket she always used while reading remained folded over the couch. A framed photograph of their trip to Lake Michigan rested on the bookshelf. He picked it up carefully. 2 smiling faces looked back at him. They looked like strangers now. He placed the frame back exactly where it had been. Then he walked to the bathroom. He looked into the mirror for a long time. I became the man I promised I'd never become. His own reflection offered no comfort, only truth. He reached for his phone. His finger hovered over Emily's name. He wanted to call, to apologize, to beg, to explain. Instead, he slowly put the phone down. For the first time in his life, he realized something many people learn too late. An apology, offered to ease your own guilt, is not always a gift to the person you've hurt. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is give them the space they didn't have to fight for. Outside, the city continued, as if nothing had happened. Traffic moved, restaurants filled with laughter. Couples walked hand in hand beneath the evening lights. Life never pauses for one person's heartbreak. But inside one quiet apartment, a man finally understood that real strength is not found in controlling another person's choices. It is found in taking complete responsibility for your own. The next morning, Chicago woke beneath a blanket of grey clouds. Rain tapped softly against the windows of Ethan's apartment. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same moment replaying with painful clarity. Emily's tear-filled eyes. The engagement ring resting on the table. The sound of the door closing behind her. By sunrise, he had accepted one painful truth. No amount of regret could undo what had happened. But regret could become the beginning of responsibility. He reached for his phone. Instead of calling Emily, he searched for something he had avoided his entire adult life. Trauma therapist. His finger hovered over the screen for several seconds. Then he made the call. Across town, Emily remained at the hospital with her mother. Linda was recovering well, and the doctors expected she would return home within a few days. Rachel arrived carrying breakfast and a change of clothes. You look exhausted, Rachel said gently. Emily smiled faintly. I feel like I've lived an entire year in 2 days. Rachel sat beside her. You don't have to make any decisions today. I know, but everyone keeps asking what I'm going to do. And what are you telling them? Emily looked down at the untouched cup of coffee in her hands. I'm telling them the truth. I don't know. Rachel nodded. There are people who'll tell you to forgive immediately. There are others who'll tell you never to speak to him again. Emily sighed. Neither of them has to live my life. Rachel smiled softly. Exactly. The only decision you have to make today is to take care of yourself. Emily looked at her gratefully. For the first time since the wedding day, she realized something important. Sometimes the people who truly love us don't tell us what to choose. They remind us that we have the right to choose. Ethan's therapy appointment was scheduled for that afternoon. The waiting room was quiet. Books lined the shelves. Soft piano music played in the background. A few minutes later, the therapist opened the door. Ethan Carter? He stood. I'm Dr. Sarah Bennett. She smiled warmly. Come in. The office felt nothing like he had imagined. There were no intimidating desks, no judgmental expressions, only 2 comfortable chairs facing one another. After a few moments of silence, Dr. Bennett asked the simplest question. What brought you here today? Ethan swallowed hard. I hurt someone I love. She waited. I don't want to become that person again. She nodded. That's an important place to begin. He frowned. It is? Yes. Because you didn't say you came here to get her back. You said you came because you want to change. For the first time in days, Ethan felt understood. Not excused. Understood. Dr. Bennett continued. Tell me about the home you grew up in. The question surprised him. What does that have to do with what happened? A great deal. She leaned forward. Our past explains many of our emotional patterns. It does not excuse harmful choices. But understanding those patterns helps us prevent repeating them. Ethan took a long breath. Then, for the first time in years, he began telling the truth about his childhood, about never knowing whether his father would greet him with a smile or criticism, about believing mistakes made him unworthy of love, about spending his entire life trying to be perfect because perfection felt safer than rejection. When he finished, Dr. Bennett quietly said, "You spent decades believing that love disappears when people are disappointed." Tears filled his eyes. "I never realized it." She nodded. "Awareness is the first step. The second is learning that your past does not have to become someone else's future." Those words settled deeply inside him. Meanwhile, Linda was discharged from the hospital. Back at home, she and Emily sat on the back porch watching birds gather around a feeder in the garden. After several peaceful minutes, Linda spoke. "Do you know what your father taught me during our marriage?" Emily smiled. "What?" "He used to say that love is like tending a garden." Emily laughed softly. "That sounds like Dad." Linda smiled. "You can't force flowers to bloom. You can only create the conditions where they have the chance to grow." She looked toward her daughter. "The same is true for people. You can encourage growth. You can support it. But you cannot do someone else's growing for them." Emily thought quietly about those words. "So, if Ethan changes..." Linda nodded. "That change has to come from him. Not because he hopes you'll return, but because becoming healthier is the right thing to do." Emily looked across the garden. "I hope he does." Linda squeezed her daughter's hand. "So do I." Weeks turned into months. The apartment Ethan had once shared with Emily gradually changed, not because he erased every memory, but because he began creating new habits. Therapy every Tuesday, journaling every evening, morning walks before work, learning to recognize fear before it became anger, learning to pause before reacting, learning that emotions are invitations to understand ourselves, not commands that must be obeyed. One afternoon, Dr. Bennett handed him a blank sheet of paper. "I want you to write 2 letters. One to Emily, and one to yourself." Ethan nodded. "Will she read hers?" "No." He looked confused. "Then what's the point?" She smiled. "Sometimes the most important conversations are the ones we need to have with ourselves." Emily also began rebuilding. She returned to teaching. Her students knew nothing about the wedding. To them, she was simply Miss Monroe, the teacher who remembered birthdays, who stayed after school to help struggling readers, who believed every child deserved encouragement. One afternoon, a little girl named Ava approached her desk. "My parents argued yesterday." Emily looked up gently. "I'm sorry to hear that." Ava frowned. "Do people stop loving each other when they argue?" Emily smiled with quiet kindness. "No. Healthy people can disagree and still love each other." The little girl tilted her head. "Then, how do you know when something isn't healthy?" Emily thought carefully before answering. "When someone makes you feel afraid instead of respected. When your voice no longer feels safe. When kindness disappears." She smiled warmly. "Real love makes room for both people to be heard." Ava smiled. "I like that." "So do I," Emily whispered. As the child skipped back to her seat, Emily realized she had spoken those words as much for herself as for anyone else. Sometimes, healing begins the moment we start living the lessons we once only understood in theory. Sometimes the greatest classroom is life itself. And although Ethan and Emily were now walking different roads, both were slowly learning the same lesson. Love is not proven by how tightly we hold on. It is proven by how willing we are to grow into people who make others feel safe. 5 years later, autumn painted Chicago in shades of amber, crimson, and gold. Leaves drifted across sidewalks where strangers hurried to work, children laughed on their way to school, and life continued with the quiet confidence that time eventually teaches every city. For most people, it was an ordinary Tuesday. For Ethan Carter, it marked exactly 5 years since the day he had lost the woman he thought he would spend the rest of his life with. He still remembered the date without looking at a calendar, not because he wanted to relive it, but because it had become the day his life divided into 2 chapters. The man he had been before, and the man he was still trying to become. His architectural firm had grown considerably over the years. The young designer, who once worried about proving himself, now led a respected team that restored historic buildings throughout Chicago. Ironically, he had become known for rebuilding structures that others believed were beyond saving. His assistant often joked, "If anyone can bring an old building back to life, it's Ethan Carter." Every time she said it, a quiet sadness crossed his face. Some things could be restored, some couldn't. One Friday afternoon, a new intern named Lucas nervously approached Ethan's office. "Mr. Carter?" Ethan looked up from a blueprint. "You can call me Ethan." Lucas smiled awkwardly. "I made a mistake on the proposal." "You did?" "I submitted the wrong measurements. I think I ruined everything." Ethan stood and walked over to the young man. 5 years earlier, he might have reacted differently. Stress would have tightened his shoulders. Fear would have whispered that mistakes meant failure. Instead, he simply asked, "Can we fix it?" Lucas blinked. I think so." "Then let's fix it together." The young man's shoulders relaxed immediately. After Lucas left, Ethan sat quietly for a moment. He realized something. 5 years ago, someone making a mistake would have made him anxious. Today, his first instinct was to help instead of criticize. Healing hadn't happened overnight. It had happened one small choice at a time. Across the city, Emily Monroe stood in front of a classroom filled with fourth-grade students. "All right, everyone," she said with a smile. "I have a question." 25 eager hands shot into the air. "What makes someone a good friend?" Answers came flying across the room. "They share." "They tell the truth." "They're nice." "They don't laugh when you make mistakes." Emily smiled. "Those are wonderful answers." She wrote every response on the whiteboard. Then she added one more. "They make you feel safe." The room grew quiet. A little boy near the back raised his hand. "What does that mean?" Emily walked over and knelt beside his desk. "It means you don't have to pretend to be perfect around them. You can make mistakes. You can ask questions. You can say you're scared. And they'll still treat you with kindness." The children nodded thoughtfully. One little girl whispered, "My grandma makes me feel safe." Emily smiled warmly. "I think your grandma is giving you a wonderful example of love." She didn't realize that another teacher standing in the hallway had quietly overheard the conversation. Later that afternoon, the principal stopped by Emily's classroom. "I've been getting wonderful feedback from parents." Emily laughed. "I hope that's a good thing." "It is. They say their children are learning more than reading and math. They're learning character." Emily looked around her classroom. "I think education should prepare children for life. Not just tests." The principal smiled. "I couldn't agree more." That evening, Ethan arrived at the community center where he volunteered every Wednesday. 5 years earlier, Dr. Sarah Bennett had encouraged him to serve somewhere outside his career. "Growth becomes stronger," she had said, "when we stop asking how life can heal us and start asking how we can help others." At first, Ethan had volunteered because he thought it was part of becoming a better person. Eventually, he stayed because he genuinely cared. The center hosted a weekly program for teenage boys growing up without stable father figures. Many carried anger they didn't understand. Others hid fear beneath jokes and bravado. One 16-year-old, named Jamal, often challenged every adult in the room. That evening, Jamal slammed a basketball onto the court after missing an easy shot. "I'm so stupid!" Ethan walked over calmly. "Missing a shot doesn't make you stupid." Jamal shrugged. "You don't get it." "Try me." The teenager hesitated before speaking. "My dad used to say if you weren't the best, you were nothing." Ethan's heart tightened. He had heard those words before, just in a different voice. He sat beside Jamal on the wooden bleachers. "Can I tell you something?" The boy nodded. "The people who taught us how to see ourselves aren't always right." Jamal looked down at the basketball. "So, how do you change that?" Ethan smiled gently. "One belief at a time." He bounced the ball toward the teenager. "Come on, let's miss a few more shots together." For the first time all evening, Jamal laughed. Across the gym, another volunteer watched the interaction and smiled. He whispered to a colleague, "That's why Ethan is so good with these kids. He never makes them feel small." Ethan overheard the comment. It humbled him, because there had once been a time when he had made the person he loved feel exactly that. The memory still hurt. Perhaps it always would. But now, instead of allowing the pain to define him, he allowed it to guide him. He had learned that guilt asks, "What kind of person am I?" Responsibility asks, "What kind of person will I choose to become?" And every single day, he chose again. Without applause, without recognition, without expecting forgiveness. Simply because becoming a safer person was no longer something he did for Emily. It had become the way he wanted to live the rest of his life. Winter arrived early that year. Snow covered the rooftops of Chicago, softening the sharp edges of the city. 5 years had passed since the wedding that never happened. Yet there were mornings when Ethan still reached for the coffee mug Emily had once loved, before remembering she had taken it with her years ago. Some memories faded. Others simply became quieter. They no longer shouted. They whispered. And sometimes whispers were harder to silence. One Tuesday afternoon, Dr. Sarah Bennett looked across her office and smiled. "You've changed." Ethan gave a small laugh. "I hope that's a good thing." "It is." She closed the notebook resting on her lap. "When you first walked into this room, Every sentence you spoke began with Emily. Ethan thought about that. And now? Now your sentences begin with responsibility. He looked out the window. I finally understood something. What is that? I spent years believing becoming a better man would somehow earn forgiveness. He paused. Now I understand that becoming better isn't a bargain. It's simply the right thing to do. Dr. Bennett nodded with quiet approval. That's the difference between changing for a person and changing because your values have changed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she asked one final question before ending the session. If Emily never speaks to you again, will you continue doing this work? Ethan answered without hesitation. Yes. Why? Because the people I'll meet tomorrow deserve the healthiest version of me. Dr. Bennett smiled. There it is. The answer you've been searching for. Across the city, Emily sat alone at her dining room table long after sunset. Papers were spread across the surface. Not school assignments, not lesson plans. Pages filled with handwritten thoughts. For years, she had kept a private journal. Now, one of her colleagues had encouraged her to submit an article to a local education magazine. The topic was simple: teaching children emotional intelligence. She stared at the blinking cursor on her laptop. Then she began typing. Children don't learn healthy relationships only by listening to what adults say. They learn by watching how adults handle disappointment, disagreement, and mistakes. Respect is often taught in ordinary moments, long before it is tested in difficult ones. She paused. Those words felt deeply personal, not because she intended to write about her own life, but because life had become her greatest teacher. Several weeks later, the article was published. Emily thought little of it. To her surprise, parents began writing letters. One mother shared that she and her teenage daughter had read the article together after a difficult argument. A father wrote that he had apologized to his son for losing his temper after reading it. Emily folded each letter carefully and placed them inside a small wooden box. Every message reminded her of something important. Pain could become purpose, if we allowed it. One Wednesday evening, Jamal stayed behind after basketball practice. Ethan? Yeah? Can I ask you something? Of course. The teenager hesitated. How do you know when you're becoming a man? Ethan smiled gently. I used to think it happened because of age. And now? Now I think it happens every time you choose responsibility over pride. Jamal looked thoughtful. My dad always said, real men never cry. Ethan leaned against the bleachers. My father believed something similar. So, was he wrong? Ethan took a long breath. I think strength has been misunderstood for a long time. Real strength isn't refusing to cry. It's having the courage to admit when you're wrong. It's apologizing without making excuses. It's protecting people instead of making them afraid. Jamal bounced the basketball slowly. I've never heard anyone explain it like that. But Ethan smiled. I hadn't either. Someone had to learn it first. The teenager nodded quietly. Maybe someday I'll teach my kids that. Ethan's eyes softened. I hope you do. As Jamal walked away, Ethan remained seated for several minutes. He thought about the generations of fear that could quietly pass from parent to child. Then he thought about something else. Cycles could also be broken. One conversation, one choice, one life at a time. Spring returned to Chicago. Flowers bloomed along neighborhood sidewalks. Children rode bicycles through parks once again. Life moved forward with its familiar rhythm. One Saturday morning, Rachel stopped by Emily's apartment carrying coffee and pastries. I have gossip. Emily laughed. I should have guessed. Rachel placed the cups on the kitchen counter. I ran into Marcus. Emily looked up for the first time. It had been years since she had heard either name spoken aloud. How is he? Doing well? Rachel hesitated. He mentioned Ethan. Emily remained silent. He said Ethan volunteers every week with teenagers. He also said Ethan has been in therapy for years. Emily looked out the window. Rachel quickly added, he wasn't trying to convince me of anything. He only answered because I asked. Emily nodded slowly. I'm glad. Rachel looked surprised. You are? I hoped he'd heal. She smiled sadly. I just never wanted to be the reason. Rachel reached across the table. You don't sound angry anymore. Emily looked down at her coffee. I'm not. I was hurt. I was disappointed. But anger is heavy. I didn't want to carry it forever. Rachel asked carefully, do you forgive him? Emily thought for a long time before answering. I forgave him years ago. Rachel blinked. You never told me. Emily smiled. Forgiveness is something I did inside my own heart. It wasn't an announcement. Rachel gently squeezed her hand. Would you ever see him again? Emily's expression became thoughtful. I honestly don't know. She looked toward the blooming trees outside. Some doors close because of hatred. Ours closed because trust disappeared. Those are different things. The room fell quiet. Neither woman felt the need to fill the silence. Outside, a young couple walked past, holding hands. Emily watched them disappear around the corner. She whispered almost to herself, I hope they learn the lessons we had to learn the hard way. That evening, on opposite sides of the city, Ethan and Emily both stood watching the same sunset. Neither knew the other was doing the very same thing. The sky glowed with shades of orange and violet as the sun slowly slipped below the horizon. 2 lives, 2 different journeys, one shared history that neither could erase. They no longer belonged to one another, yet the lessons born from their brief love continued shaping who they became. Sometimes, the greatest legacy of a relationship isn't the life 2 people build together. Sometimes, it's the better people they become after it ends. Neither Ethan nor Emily knew it yet, but life was quietly preparing one more chapter. Not to reunite their hearts, but to reveal just how far both of them had truly come. Before we move on, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe people can truly change after making a life-changing mistake? Or do some actions permanently close the door to a second chance? Share your answer in the comments below. Your perspective could encourage someone else who may be struggling with forgiveness, healing, or personal growth. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. Every week, we bring you powerful American love stories filled with real emotions, unforgettable characters, and life lessons that stay with you long after the story ends. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that healing is possible and that every choice we make shapes the person we become, share this story with them. Now, let's continue, because 10 years have passed, and neither Ethan nor Emily realizes that life is quietly preparing one final lesson that will change them forever. 10 years had a way of changing people, not all at once, not through dramatic moments, but through thousands of ordinary decisions no one else ever noticed. 10 years after the wedding that never became a marriage, Chicago looked much the same. The train still rumbled through downtown every morning. The wind still swept across Lake Michigan with its familiar bite. People still hurried through crowded sidewalks, carrying coffee cups and unfinished dreams. But Ethan Carter was no longer the man who had stood frozen inside that bridal suite. He was 43 now. The streaks of grey beginning to appear at his temples weren't what made him seem older. It was the quiet patience in his eyes. The urgency that had once ruled his life had slowly been replaced by something steadier. Perspective. Every Wednesday evening, the gymnasium at the Southside Community Center filled with teenagers. Some came for basketball. Some came because there was nowhere else to go. Others came because they knew someone would actually listen. The sign outside had recently been changed. The Carter Mentorship Initiative. Ethan had argued against naming it after himself. The board insisted. You didn't build a program, one member had told him. You built a place where people feel safe. Those words humbled him every time he walked through the front doors. Across the gym, a familiar voice called out, "Coach!" Ethan turned. A tall young man in a navy jacket crossed the court with an easy smile. Jamal. No longer the angry 16-year-old who threw basketballs whenever life disappointed him. Now, he was 26. A college graduate, recently married, and, beginning that week, the newest volunteer mentor. They embraced warmly. "I still can't believe you're back," Ethan said. Jamal laughed. "You told me years ago that healing becomes stronger when it's shared." "I figured it was my turn." Ethan smiled. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything." Jamal glanced around the gym. "You know, I used to think this place saved me." He shook his head. "It didn't. You taught me how to save myself." Ethan looked away for a moment. Compliments still made him uncomfortable, especially because he knew the mistakes that had shaped him. "Ready to meet the new group?" he asked. Jamal nodded. "Absolutely." Among the teenagers was a quiet 14-year-old named Caleb. Unlike the others, he rarely spoke. He simply observed. When the basketball drills ended, Ethan noticed Caleb sitting alone on the lowest bleacher. "Mind if I join you?" The boy shrugged. "I guess." Ethan sat beside him. "You don't seem excited about basketball." "I'm not." "So, why come?" "My counselor said I should." Silence settled between them. After several moments, Caleb finally spoke. "My mom says I have anger problems." Ethan didn't rush to answer. Instead, he asked, "What do you think?" Caleb stared at the polished wooden floor. "I think I'm scared all the time." Those words landed softly, but they carried enormous weight. Ethan recognized them immediately, because once they had been his own. He nodded gently. You know something? What? Fear and anger sometimes wear the same face. Caleb frowned. I don't get it. When we're afraid, we sometimes push people away before they can leave us. When we're hurting, we sometimes try to control situations because control feels safer than uncertainty. The boy listened carefully. No one's ever explained it like that. Ethan smiled. Someone explained it to me once. He didn't mention Dr. Bennett's name. Some lessons mattered more than the person who first spoke them. What happens if you keep doing that? Caleb asked. Ethan looked across the gym, where the younger boys laughed together. You eventually realize that protecting yourself by hurting other people never really protects you. Caleb lowered his head. I don't want to become that kind of person. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. The fact that you're worried about it means you're already walking in a different direction. Across the city, Emily Monroe stood backstage inside a packed auditorium. Rows of chairs stretched farther than she could see. Teachers, parents, counselors, young couples, grandparents. More than 800 people had gathered for the annual Midwest Education Conference. 10 years earlier, Emily had been known simply as a fourth-grade teacher. Now she was also a best-selling author. Her first book, The Courage to Communicate, had quietly become a national bestseller. Readers loved it because it didn't promise perfect relationships. It taught healthier ones. A conference organizer approached with a microphone. They're ready for you. Emily smiled nervously. I still get butterflies. Good. The organizer grinned. It means you still care. As Emily stepped onto the stage, warm applause filled the auditorium. She waited for the room to settle. Then she smiled. When people hear the words healthy relationship, she began, they usually imagine romance. A few audience members nodded. But the truth is, our first healthy relationship should be with ourselves. Only then can we build healthy relationships with others. The audience grew wonderfully quiet. Everyone leaned forward, not because she was famous, but because she spoke with the calm honesty of someone who had lived every lesson she shared. And somewhere, without either of them knowing it, the paths of Ethan and Emily were beginning to move toward one final intersection. Not to rewrite the past, but to discover what time, accountability, and grace had quietly accomplished. The applause lingered long after Emily stepped away from the podium. People formed a line stretching across the conference hall, each carrying a copy of The Courage to Communicate. Some wanted an autograph. Others wanted a photograph. Most simply wanted to say, thank you. A young woman in her late 20s waited patiently until the line had nearly disappeared. When she finally reached the table, she placed a well-worn copy of the book in front of Emily. I've read this 4 times. Emily smiled. That might be the nicest compliment an author can receive. The woman laughed softly. I almost didn't buy it. What changed your mind? The title. Emily tilted her head. The Courage to Communicate? The young woman nodded. I grew up in a house where everyone yelled. She hesitated before continuing. I thought love meant whoever shouted the loudest won. Emily's expression softened. And now? Now, my husband and I have one rule. What rule? If one of us is too angry to speak kindly, we wait. Emily smiled. That's a wonderful rule. The woman looked down at the book. You probably don't realize it. But you helped end something that had been passed through my family for generations. Emily signed the inside cover. Healthy love isn't perfect. It's safe. Emily. As the woman walked away, Emily sat quietly for a moment. She had written the book hoping it might help someone. She never imagined it might help strangers rewrite the stories they inherited. 3 weeks later, Ethan found himself waiting for a delayed flight at Chicago's airport. Business trips had become more common since his firm began restoring historic landmarks across the country. He wandered through the terminal bookstore, looking for something to read. A display near the entrance caught his attention. Books that change conversations. One cover stood out. Simple, elegant, white with deep blue lettering. The Courage to Communicate. He picked it up. The subtitle read, Building Relationships Through Respect, Emotional Safety, and Honest Conversation. He smiled. The title alone intrigued him. Without thinking much about it, he carried the book to the checkout counter. The cashier scanned it. Excellent choice. You've read it? My wife made me. The cashier laughed. Best thing she ever did. Ethan smiled politely. I'll have to let you know what I think. He slipped the book into his carry-on bag and headed toward his gate. He never noticed the author's photograph printed on the back cover. The luggage tag attached to the handle had folded over it. Sometimes life hides its biggest surprises in the smallest details. Halfway through the flight, Ethan opened the book. The introduction began with a sentence that immediately held his attention. Healthy relationships are not built by people who never make mistakes. They are built by people willing to take responsibility for them. He stopped reading. Something about those words felt deeply familiar. Not because he had heard them before, because he had spent the last decade trying to live them. He turned another page. Emily wrote with warmth rather than judgment. She never spoke as though she had all the answers. Instead, she invited readers to ask better questions. One chapter discussed conflict. Another explored emotional safety. A third explained why listening is often more powerful than winning an argument. Ethan found himself underlining passages with the airline's complimentary pen. One sentence especially stayed with him. Fear asks, "How do I protect myself?" Love asks, "How do I protect the person beside me?" He closed the book for a moment. Outside the airplane window, clouds stretched endlessly beneath the afternoon sun. He whispered to himself, "I wish I'd understood that years ago." The older gentleman seated beside him glanced over. "Good book?" Ethan smiled. "I've only read a few chapters, but I already think it's changing me." The man nodded knowingly. The best books usually don't tell us something new. They help us finally understand something we've been avoiding. Ethan looked back at the pages. He had the strange feeling that the author understood him. Not personally, but deeply. A month later, Emily received an unexpected email from her publisher. "Your book has been selected for the National Relationship Family Wellness Summit in Boston." She stared at the message in disbelief. Her publisher called a few minutes later. "Congratulations." Emily laughed. "I still feel like an elementary school teacher pretending to be an author." "Don't lose that feeling." "Why not?" "It keeps your writing honest." She smiled. "Then, I hope I never outgrow it." Before hanging up, her publisher added, "One more thing. We're translating the book into Spanish next year." Emily sat in stunned silence after the call ended. She thought back to the quiet evenings at her kitchen table, writing chapter after grading spelling tests. She had never written for recognition. She had written because she hoped someone, somewhere, might feel less alone. That same evening, Jamal stopped by Ethan's office at the community center. He carried 2 cups of coffee. "You've been reading that book for weeks." Ethan held up the paperback. "I keep rereading chapters." "Is that good?" "It's honest." He handed it to Jamal. "Listen to this." He read aloud. "Accountability isn't the end of shame. It's the beginning of freedom." Jamal nodded slowly. "I like that." "So do I." He closed the book gently. "You know, for years I thought healing meant forgetting. I don't think that anymore." "What do you think now?" Jamal asked. Ethan looked toward the gym, where a group of teenagers laughed during practice. "I think healing means remembering differently. The memory stays, but it no longer controls the person you've become." Jamal smiled. "I think that's true." Neither man realized that the woman whose words had helped shape that conversation had once been the center of Ethan's entire future. Fate had quietly placed her voice back into his life, not through a reunion, not through coincidence, but through a book written to heal strangers. As the first snowflakes of winter began to fall outside the community center windows, Ethan slipped a bookmark between the pages and looked once more at the cover. For the first time, curiosity led him to turn the book over. His eyes fell on the author's photograph. His breath caught. His hands became perfectly still. There, smiling gently beneath her name, was the woman he had not seen in 10 years. Emily Monroe. For several long seconds, Ethan forgot where he was. The sounds of basketballs bouncing across the gym faded into the background. Teenagers laughed somewhere down the hallway. A volunteer called out instructions from the weight room. Life continued around him. But Ethan sat perfectly still, staring at the photograph on the back of the book. Emily, older, wiser. The warmth in her smile hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed. It was no longer the hopeful smile of a woman standing on the edge of a new beginning. It was the peaceful smile of someone who had walked through sorrow and refused to let it harden her heart. Below the photograph was a short author biography. Emily Monroe is an award-winning educator, speaker, and best-selling author whose work focuses on emotional intelligence, healthy communication, and building relationships rooted in respect and trust. Ethan read the paragraph twice. Then, a third time. His eyes stopped on one sentence. She lives in Boston, Massachusetts. Boston, nearly 1,000 miles away. He leaned back in his chair. For 10 years, he had imagined countless versions of Emily's future. He had wondered whether she had married, whether she had children, whether she was happy, whether she ever thought about him. Now, for the first time, he knew one thing with certainty. She had built a meaningful life, a life that reached people far beyond the painful ending of their own story. Instead of feeling jealous, he felt grateful. A quiet smile crossed his face. "I'm glad you found your purpose," he whispered. Jamal noticed the unusual silence. "You okay?" Ethan turned the book toward him. "I know the author." Jamal looked at the photograph. "A friend?" Ethan hesitated. "No." Then he corrected himself. "The woman I was supposed to marry." Jamal looked surprised, but didn't ask another question immediately. Instead, he sat beside Ethan. After a moment, he asked softly, "Is this the first time you've seen her?" "In 10 years. What are you thinking?" Ethan looked down at the cover. "I'm realizing something." "What?" "The woman in this picture isn't the woman I lost." Jamal frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "She's someone life continued shaping after I was gone." He smiled sadly. "And I'm someone life continued shaping after she was gone." Jamal nodded slowly. "So neither of you stayed frozen?" "No." Ethan closed the book gently. "And that's a good thing." That weekend, Ethan attended his niece Lily's 12th birthday party. The backyard buzzed with laughter as children chased balloons and adults gathered around picnic tables. His younger sister, Rebecca, carried over 2 glasses of lemonade. "You've been quiet today." "I've been thinking." She smiled. "That's usually dangerous." He laughed. "I found out something about Emily." Rebecca's expression softened. She had never stopped caring for Emily. "I didn't know you were still in touch." "We're not." He showed her the book. Rebecca studied the cover. "Oh, Ethan. Oh, I had no idea." "Neither did I." Rebecca turned the book over and smiled. "She looks happy." "I think she is." Rebecca handed the book back. "How does that make you feel?" He looked across the yard, where Lily was teaching her little cousins how to fly a kite. "Relieved." His sister seemed surprised. "Really?" He nodded. "For years I prayed she'd find peace. I just never expected to witness it." Rebecca smiled proudly. "You've changed." "So, everyone keeps telling me." "No." She shook her head gently. "I don't mean your habits. I mean your heart." She looked him in the eyes. 10 years ago, hearing she was happy without you would have broken you. He thought about that. She was right. 10 years earlier, he would have seen Emily's success as proof that she had moved on without him. Today, he saw it as proof that healing was possible. For both of them. Several days later in Boston, Emily stood in the reading corner of an independent bookstore. The monthly discussion group had gathered to talk about healthy communication in families. The event was informal. No stage, no bright lights. Just 20 people seated in a circle with warm coffee and open hearts. After the discussion ended, an older woman lingered behind. "My husband passed away last year," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." The woman smiled gently. "We were married 52 years. Emily listened. "Do you know what your book reminded me?" "What?" "That love isn't measured by how few conflicts you have. It's measured by how safe you make each other while working through them." Emily's eyes glistened. The woman continued. "My husband and I disagreed plenty." She laughed softly. "But we never tried to win. We tried to understand." She reached out and squeezed Emily's hand. "Thank you for reminding people that kindness belongs inside disagreements too." After the woman left, Emily remained standing for a moment. She looked around the quiet bookstore. Every shelf held stories. Stories of triumph, loss, adventure, second chances. She wondered how many authors had unknowingly written the very book they themselves had once needed to read. Perhaps she had done exactly that. That evening, Emily walked home through the crisp Boston air. She passed families leaving restaurants, college students laughing on street corners, and an elderly couple walking hand in hand. The sight made her smile. She no longer felt sadness when she saw happy couples. Instead, she felt hope. Not hope that her own past would return. Hope that more people would learn how to protect the love they were fortunate enough to have. As she reached her apartment building, her phone rang. It was her publisher. "Emily, wonderful news." "What happened?" "We've been invited to speak at the National Relationship Family Wellness Summit next spring." Emily laughed. "I thought we already accepted." "We did. But there's something new. The organizers are creating a mentorship panel. They want educators, therapists, community leaders, and people who've transformed lives through relationship education." Emily smiled. "That sounds wonderful." "It does. And one of the organizations they've invited is a mentorship program from Chicago." Emily paused. She had no reason to think anything of it. Chicago was a large city. Hundreds of organizations served young people. Still, for reasons she couldn't explain, the word lingered in her mind. Chicago. Some memories never disappear completely. They simply become quieter with time. She looked out across the city lights. Life has a curious way of connecting people, she whispered. She had no idea just how true those words were about to become. The invitation arrived on Ethan's desk on a rainy Thursday morning. He almost ignored it. Between architectural deadlines and the growing mentorship program, conference invitations had become a regular occurrence. Most of them went unanswered. Jamal stepped into his office carrying a stack of mail. Another speaking invitation. Ethan looked up from a blueprint. What is it this time? Jamal glanced at the envelope. The National Relationship Family Wellness Summit. Ethan smiled politely. I appreciate them thinking of us, but I'm not much of a speaker. Jamal laughed. You tell that to the teenagers who hang on every word you say. That's different. How? They don't expect perfection. Jamal folded his arms. Neither will the audience. Ethan opened the envelope. Inside was a formal invitation requesting that the Carter Mentorship Initiative participate in a panel discussion titled Breaking Generational Cycles, Teaching Healthy Masculinity and Emotional Responsibility. His eyes remained fixed on the title. For years, those exact ideas had become the foundation of the work he loved most. A handwritten note rested at the bottom of the page. Your mentorship program has become a model for communities across the Midwest. We would be honored if you would share your experience. Ethan quietly placed the letter back inside the envelope. I'll think about it. Jamal smiled. I already know what that means. It means maybe. No. It means yes. They both laughed. A week later, in Boston, Emily sat with the conference planning committee over a long oak table. Name tags, schedules, and presentation folders covered every available space. The coordinator, Melissa Grant, looked around the room. We've finalized almost every panel. She smiled. There's just one I'm especially excited about. Emily looked up from her notes. Which one? Melissa handed everyone a printed schedule. The mentorship panel. It brings together educators, counselors, and community leaders who are helping reshape how young people think about relationships. Emily nodded approvingly. We need more conversations like that. So do I, Melissa replied. She continued reviewing the list of participants. Emily listened only casually until one sentence caught her attention. And representing Chicago, the Carter Mentorship Initiative. Her heart skipped once. Only once. Carter. It wasn't an uncommon surname. There were thousands of Carters across America. She told herself it was only a coincidence. Still, her fingers rested motionless on the edge of the schedule. Melissa continued speaking. The program has received national recognition for helping young men develop emotional intelligence, accountability, and healthy conflict resolution. Emily smiled quietly. Whoever led that organization, they were doing meaningful work. 2 months later, the conference hotel buzzed with activity. Volunteers arranged signs. Authors unpacked books. Speakers greeted colleagues they hadn't seen in years. The lobby hummed with quiet excitement. Ethan stepped through the revolving doors carrying a single overnight bag. He still disliked large conferences. Too many people. Too much attention. Jamal nudged him playfully. You look like someone heading to a dentist appointment. I'd rather mentor 50 teenagers. I know, but people need to hear your story. Ethan smiled. I hope they hear the lesson. At the registration desk, Emily collected her conference badge. The volunteer smiled warmly. Ms. Monroe, we're honored to have you back. Thank you. You'll be speaking tomorrow morning. Emily nodded. And your panel discussion has been moved to the main ballroom. Why? So many people registered that we needed a larger room. She laughed softly. I hope they're coming for the topic. I think they're coming for both. Emily thanked her and walked toward the elevators. At almost the same moment, Ethan stepped out of another elevator carrying a folder of presentation notes. Neither noticed the other. They passed within 20 feet. 2 strangers in a crowded hotel. 2 lives once deeply connected, now separated by 10 years of growth. Sometimes life doesn't rush important moments. It prepares them patiently. That evening, the conference hosted a welcome reception. Small groups gathered around high tables, exchanging ideas and experiences. Emily found herself speaking with a family therapist from Seattle. I've read your book twice, he admitted. It changed how I work with couples. Emily smiled. I appreciate you saying that. What inspired you to write it? She paused thoughtfully. Failure. The therapist looked surprised. Emily continued. I've learned that some of life's greatest lessons come from experiences we'd never choose. The important question isn't whether our hearts get broken. It's what those broken places teach us about becoming kinder. Across the room, Ethan was having a very different conversation. A young counselor approached him. I wanted to thank you. Ethan looked confused. We've never met. I know. But one of the boys you mentored, Caleb, is now volunteering at our youth center. Ethan smiled proudly. He's a wonderful young man. He told me something you once said. What was that? The counselor smiled. Being strong isn't about controlling your emotions. It's about learning to understand them before they control you. Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment. I wish someone had taught me that when I was younger. The counselor nodded. Maybe. But because you learned it later. You've now taught hundreds of others. Those words stayed with Ethan long after the conversation ended. Perhaps this was how healing spread. Not all at once, but from one changed life to another. Near the end of the evening, Melissa stepped onto the small stage. She tapped the microphone gently. If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment. The room gradually quieted. We'd like to recognize two individuals whose work has profoundly influenced families, schools, and communities across our country. Applause filled the ballroom. Melissa smiled. Tomorrow morning, best-selling author Emily Monroe will deliver our keynote address on building emotionally safe relationships. The audience applauded warmly. Emily stood and waved modestly. And tomorrow afternoon, the Carter Mentorship Initiative will present our featured session on helping young men break unhealthy generational patterns. More applause echoed through the room. Ethan nodded politely from the back of the ballroom. Neither of them looked toward the other. Neither realized they were standing beneath the same roof. The distance between them was no longer measured in miles, only in moments. And by this time tomorrow, those moments would finally run out. The conference ballroom was already full when Emily stepped onto the stage. More than 1,000 people filled the seats. Teachers, counselors, psychologists, parents, community leaders, students. For a brief moment, Emily stood quietly behind the podium, looking across the audience. 10 years ago, standing before a crowd would have terrified her. Now, she no longer spoke to impress people. She spoke because she hoped someone might leave the room believing healthier relationships were possible. She smiled warmly. Good morning, everyone. The audience greeted her with enthusiastic applause. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you a question. The room grew still. How many of you have ever said something in anger that you wished you could take back? Hands slowly began rising, one after another. Eventually, nearly every hand in the ballroom was raised. Emily nodded gently. I see mine too. A ripple of soft laughter moved through the audience. The reason I ask is because we often believe the biggest threats to relationships are dramatic moments. She paused. But most relationships aren't slowly damaged by one terrible day. They're shaped by thousands of ordinary conversations. The way we listen, the way we apologize, the way we respond when someone disappoints us. She stepped away from the podium. Healthy love isn't built during the easy seasons. It's revealed during the difficult ones. Near the back of the ballroom, Ethan listened without moving. Every sentence seemed to settle somewhere deep inside him. She wasn't speaking about him. She wasn't speaking about their past. She was speaking about principles, truths, lessons that belonged to everyone in the room. And somehow, that made them even more powerful. 45 minutes later, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Emily thanked everyone and stepped away from the microphone. As people lined up for questions, Ethan quietly slipped out a side door. He wasn't avoiding her. He simply didn't want his presence to become a distraction from the work she had spent years building. Outside the ballroom, he stood beside a large window overlooking the city. Boston stretched beneath a bright spring sky. Jamal found him a few minutes later. You disappeared. I needed a little air. Jamal smiled knowingly. You heard her? I did. What did you think? Ethan looked out the window. I think she became exactly the person she was always meant to become. Jamal waited, and I realized something. What? I don't miss the life I imagined anymore. I admire the life she actually built. Inside the ballroom, Emily answered questions for nearly an hour. A young man approached the microphone. I'm 23. My parents argued every day growing up. I'm afraid I'll become like my father. Emily smiled with genuine compassion. The fact that you're asking that question already tells me you're paying attention. She stepped closer. Our parents influence us. They do not imprison us. Awareness gives us choices. And every healthy choice you make becomes part of a new legacy. The young man nodded, wiping away a tear. Thank you. As the session ended, Melissa approached Emily. "You were wonderful." Emily laughed softly. "I still think people came for the free coffee." Melissa grinned. "I'd like you to meet one of our afternoon presenters." Emily adjusted the stack of books in her arms. "Of course." They walked together through the hallway. At the opposite end, Ethan and Jamal were walking toward the mentorship panel room. Neither pair knew the other was approaching. Conference attendees crossed between them. Someone stopped Melissa to ask a question. Emily waited patiently. Meanwhile, another attendee briefly interrupted Ethan to thank him for his youth mentoring work. The hallway became crowded, busy, noisy. Then, as the crowd shifted, Emily looked up. So did Ethan. For a single heartbeat, the hallway disappeared. Neither spoke. Neither smiled immediately. Time seemed to fold in on itself. 10 years, thousands of miles, countless ordinary days, reduced to one quiet moment of recognition. Emily saw silver beginning to touch Ethan's hair. She noticed something else too. His shoulders no longer carried the constant tension she remembered. He looked peaceful. Ethan saw confidence in Emily that had once been hidden beneath quiet kindness. She still had the same gentle eyes. But now they reflected something new. A calm certainty. Neither of them moved. Neither knew what words could possibly belong to a moment 10 years in the making. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Hello, Emily." His voice was soft, respectful, nothing more. Emily offered a small smile. "Hello, Ethan." No bitterness, no anger. Just two people acknowledging one another. Melissa looked between them. "You've met?" Emily glanced toward Ethan before answering. "Many years ago." There was no resentment in her voice, only truth. Melissa smiled, unaware of the history between them. "Well, this is wonderful. Ethan leads one of the most respected youth mentorship programs in the country." Emily turned toward him. "I've heard about your work." He seemed genuinely surprised. "You have?" She nodded. "The conference materials highlighted your program. I've been looking forward to attending your session." Ethan smiled faintly. "And I've already attended yours." There was another quiet pause, not uncomfortable, simply unfamiliar. The silence two people share after becoming strangers, and then discovering they no longer are. For the first time since their wedding day, they stood face to face, not as the frightened young couple who had once imagined forever, but as two adults who had spent 10 years learning that love is measured not only by how we cherish another person, but by how willing we are to become someone who brings more kindness into the world. Neither knew where the conversation would lead. Neither expected the past to disappear. But for the first time in a decade, they were standing in the same place. And this time, fear wasn't speaking, only peace. For a few moments, neither Ethan nor Emily spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, because both understood that some conversations deserve patience. Melissa glanced at her watch. "I should let you two catch up." She smiled politely and walked toward another group of conference guests. Jamal, sensing the moment belonged to them, quietly excused himself as well. "I'll see you at the panel, Ethan." With that, they were alone. Not completely. Conference attendees continued walking past them. Coffee cups clinked. Elevator doors opened and closed. Laughter drifted through the lobby. Life moved around them, exactly as it always had. Yet for Ethan and Emily, everything felt remarkably still. Ethan was the first to break the silence. "I read your book." Emily looked pleasantly surprised. "You did?" He nodded. "Twice." A small smile appeared on her face. "I hope it was worth your time. It changed the way I mentor young men." She looked genuinely touched. "That means more to me than book sales ever could." He laughed softly. "I underlined half the pages." Emily smiled. "I always wondered who actually underlines books." "I do now." Another brief silence settled between them. This one felt easier, less uncertain. Finally, Ethan spoke the words he had carried for 10 years. "I've wanted to say something for a very long time." Emily looked at him quietly. "I'm listening." He took a slow breath. "I'm sorry." He stopped, not because he had finished, because he refused to rush the truth. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to revisit the past." He looked directly into her eyes. "I only want you to know that what happened that day was entirely my responsibility. I've spent the last 10 years making sure it would never happen again." Emily didn't interrupt. She simply listened. He continued. "I used to think my childhood explained what I did. Now I understand it only explained what I needed to heal. It never excused my choice." His voice grew quieter. "I failed the person I loved most. And I've had to live with that." When he finished, he didn't look away. He didn't search her face for reassurance. He simply allowed the truth to stand on its own. Emily noticed the difference immediately. 10 years earlier, Ethan had often apologized while hoping to make the discomfort disappear. Today, he wasn't trying to escape the consequences. He was simply honoring the truth. She nodded gently. "Thank you." Those 2 words surprised him. She continued, "Not because the apology erases what happened. It doesn't. But because I can hear the difference." He frowned slightly. "What difference?" "You aren't apologizing because you want something from me." She smiled softly. "You're apologizing because honesty has become part of who you are." Ethan felt tears gathering in his eyes. He blinked them away. "I wasn't sure I'd ever have the chance to tell you." Emily looked toward the large windows overlooking Boston Harbor. "I wasn't sure I'd ever need to hear it." She turned back to him. "But I'm glad I did." A volunteer approached to refill the coffee station nearby. Neither Ethan nor Emily moved. The conversation continued naturally. "I heard about your mentorship program," Emily said. "The conference packet included your story." He smiled modestly. "It's never really been my story. It's theirs." He pointed toward a photograph on his conference badge showing several teenagers. "They're the reason I keep going." Emily studied the picture. "They look happy." "They are." He laughed quietly. "They've taught me as much as I've taught them." "I believe that." She looked thoughtful. "I've always found that children have a way of exposing our blind spots. So do teenagers." They both laughed. It was the first time they had laughed together in more than a decade. The sound felt unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting. Emily reached into her conference bag. "I have something for you." He looked surprised. She removed a copy of The Courage to Communicate. Opening the front cover, she wrote for a moment before handing it to him. He glanced down. "To Ethan, thank you for choosing growth instead of bitterness. May the lives you continue to touch always remind you that one mistake does not have to become a life's definition." "Emily," he stared at the inscription. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." She smiled. "I've already said it." He carefully closed the book. "I'll treasure this." "I know." An announcement echoed through the lobby speakers. "All presenters for the afternoon mentorship panel, please report backstage." Ethan glanced toward the ballroom entrance. "That's me." Emily nodded. "I'll be in the audience." His eyes widened slightly. "You don't have to." "I know. I want to." He smiled. "I'd be honored." An hour later, the ballroom filled once again. Ethan stood on stage beside psychologists, educators, and youth advocates. Unlike Emily's keynote, his presentation wasn't polished. He didn't rely on dramatic stories. He simply spoke from experience. "When I first started mentoring," he said, "I believed young people needed better advice." He smiled. "I was wrong. They needed safer adults." The audience grew quiet. They needed someone who wouldn't shame them for asking difficult questions. They needed someone who could admit when he didn't have every answer. He paused. "The greatest lesson I've learned is this. We don't teach emotional maturity only by explaining it. We teach it by practicing it. When a child makes a mistake, they're watching how we respond. When a spouse disappoints us, they're watching. When a coworker fails, they're watching. Our reactions become someone else's education." From the fourth row, Emily listened with quiet admiration. She didn't see the frightened young man she had once loved. She saw someone who had allowed pain to become wisdom instead of resentment. And she felt something unexpected. Not the desire to return to the past. Not the hope of beginning again. Just gratitude. Gratitude that 2 broken lives had not remained broken forever. Sometimes healing does not restore what was lost. Sometimes it creates something entirely new. 2 people, living separate lives, leaving the world kinder than they found it. Perhaps that too was a beautiful ending. The conference ended with handshakes, photographs, and promises to stay in touch. Attendees slowly drifted toward airport shuttles and train stations, carrying notebooks filled with ideas and hearts quietly stirred by stories they had heard over the past 3 days. For Ethan, however, the most important moment of the conference hadn't happened on a stage. It had happened in a hallway, a simple conversation, a sincere apology, nothing more, nothing less. As he boarded his flight back to Chicago, Emily's signed copy of The Courage to Communicate rested carefully inside his briefcase. He found himself reading the inscription again. "Thank you for choosing growth instead of bitterness." He smiled to himself. There had been a time when he believed redemption meant undoing the past. Now he understood something different. The past could never be rewritten, but the future could be lived differently. Every day, one choice at a time. Across the aisle sat a young couple in their late 20s. They weren't arguing loudly. If anything, they were trying very hard not to. The woman stared out the window. The man folded and unfolded his boarding pass. Finally, he spoke. "I'm sorry." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked quietly, "What are you sorry for?" The young man hesitated. "I don't know. I just don't like when you're upset." She turned toward him. "See? That's the problem. You want the feeling to disappear. But you haven't understood why I'm hurt." Ethan lowered his eyes. He wasn't trying to listen. The conversation simply reached him, and it reminded him of something Dr. Sarah Bennett had taught him years earlier. A meaningful apology isn't measured by how quickly it's offered. It's measured by how deeply it's understood. Several minutes later, the young man tried again. "I'm sorry I interrupted you. I'm sorry I made you feel like your opinion didn't matter." The woman's expression softened. "Thank you." That single sentence changed everything between them. They weren't smiling. They weren't pretending everything was suddenly perfect, but they had finally begun the real conversation. Ethan quietly looked out the airplane window. Life never stopped teaching, if we remained willing to learn. Back in Boston, Emily returned to her apartment carrying a suitcase full of conference materials. She set everything down by the front door and laughed. "I definitely packed too many books." Her phone rang. It was Rachel. "So?" Rachel said excitedly. "How was the conference?" Emily smiled. "It was wonderful." And? And what?" Rachel laughed. "Don't do that. I know you met him." Emily sat quietly on the edge of the couch. "Yes, I did." A long pause followed. Finally, Rachel asked, "How are you feeling?" Emily looked toward the window where rain tapped gently against the glass. "Peaceful." "Really? Really?" Rachel sounded surprised. "I expected, I don't know." "More emotion?" Emily smiled softly. "There was emotion, but not the kind I expected." She paused. "I didn't see the man who hurt me. I saw a man who had spent 10 years making sure no one else would experience what I did." Rachel remained silent. Emily continued, "That doesn't erase the past. It never will. But it reminded me that people are capable of remarkable change." Rachel asked carefully, "Do you think you'll ever see him again?" Emily looked at the conference badge still resting on her kitchen table. "If life gives us another conversation, I won't be afraid of it." Weeks passed. Spring slowly gave way to summer. One Wednesday afternoon, Jamal stopped by Ethan's office carrying a thick envelope. "This came for you." Ethan looked up. "No return address?" Jamal shook his head. "Just your name." After Jamal left, Ethan carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten note from the conference organizers. They thanked him for his presentation and included copies of anonymous feedback submitted by attendees. One comment immediately caught his attention. "For years I believed people never truly changed. After hearing Mr. Carter speak, I realized genuine accountability doesn't ask to be rewarded. It simply chooses to become better." Another read, "I brought my teenage son to this conference. On the drive home, he told me he finally understood that being a man isn't about never making mistakes. It's about taking responsibility for them." Ethan quietly folded the papers. He thought about the frightened young man he had once been. If someone had told him that his greatest contribution to the world would grow out of his greatest failure, he never would have believed it. Yet, here he was. Not proud of what had happened, never proud, but grateful that pain had not been wasted. That evening, Emily sat alone at her desk. For several months, she had been considering a second book. The blank page on her computer seemed unusually intimidating. Finally, she typed a title. "The Letter We Never Send." She stared at the words. It wasn't going to be a book about romance. It was going to be a book about unfinished conversations, about forgiveness, about accountability, about the words we carry inside us for years because we never found the right moment to speak them. Without fully understanding why, she opened a desk drawer. Inside lay a sealed envelope. It had been there for nearly 10 years. Her handwriting covered the front. "To Ethan." She picked it up gently. She had written it years earlier, never mailed it, never intended to. Not because it contained anger, but because, at the time, she wasn't sure whether she had written it for him, or for herself. She turned the envelope over in her hands, then smiled. "Maybe," she whispered. "It's finally time to read it again." Outside, the evening sun dipped below the Boston skyline. In Chicago, Ethan stood on the basketball court watching Jamal laugh with a new group of teenagers. Hundreds of miles apart, Both Ethan and Emily were discovering the same truth. Some letters are not written to change another person's life. They are written because, somewhere along the journey, our own hearts have finally become ready to tell the truth. Emily sat at her desk as dusk settled over Boston. The unopened envelope rested in her hands. Its edges had yellowed with time. A small crease ran across one corner where she had almost torn it open years before, only to place it back in the drawer. She smiled to herself. "It's amazing," she whispered, "how long we can carry words." Slowly, she opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten letter. The handwriting belonged to a younger version of herself, a woman whose heart was still broken, a woman still trying to understand how love and pain could exist in the same memory. She began reading. "Dear Ethan, I don't know if you'll ever read this. Maybe that's for the best. Right now, I don't know whether I'm writing to you or simply trying to understand myself. I need you to know something. The hardest part wasn't the slap. The hardest part was realizing that the man I trusted most had stopped seeing me as someone to protect and had started seeing me as someone to stop. That realization broke something inside me." Emily paused. She remembered writing those words through tears. At the time, they had felt unbearably heavy. Now, they felt honest. She continued reading. "I hope one day you become the man I believed you could be. Not so we can find each other again, but so no one else will ever have to experience what happened between us." Emily lowered the letter. Tears filled her eyes. Not tears of grief, not even tears of relief. They were tears of gratitude. Without realizing it, that hope had come true. She had seen it with her own eyes at the conference. Quietly, she folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. She didn't need to send it anymore. Life had already answered it. In Chicago, Ethan sat alone in the community center after everyone had gone home. The gym was silent except for the distant hum of the air conditioning. On his desk lay a blank sheet of paper. For nearly an hour, he simply stared at it. Finally, he picked up a pen. He wrote only 2 words, "Dear Emily." Then he stopped. Not because he lacked something to say, because he wanted every word to be true. He started again. "Dear Emily, if this letter reaches you, it won't be because I'm asking for anything. I don't expect a reply. I don't expect another conversation. After seeing you at the conference, I realize there is one truth I never expressed clearly enough." He paused before continuing. "Thank you. Thank you for refusing to lower your standards because you loved me. At the time, I believed your decision was the end of my life. Looking back, I understand it became the beginning of my education." He leaned back in his chair. Those words surprised even him. Education, that was exactly what it had been. Painful, necessary, transformative. He continued writing. "You taught me that love without respect isn't love. You taught me that apologies must be followed by change. You taught me that accountability is measured over years, not moments. I wish I had learned those lessons while we were still together. But I'm grateful I learned them at all." When he reached the end of the page, he signed it simply. "Ethan." He folded the letter, placed it inside an envelope, wrote Emily's name. Then, he set it inside the top drawer of his desk. He didn't know whether he would ever mail it. For now, it was enough that the truth existed. Several weeks later, Jamal stopped by Ethan's office. "You've been quieter than usual." Ethan smiled. "I've been thinking." "About Boston?" "Partly." Jamal leaned against the doorway. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "If Emily called today and asked to have dinner, what would you do?" Ethan smiled thoughtfully. 10 years ago, I would have hoped dinner meant getting back together. And today? Today. He looked out the office window where Caleb was helping younger boys clean up after practice. "I'd simply be grateful for the chance to thank her in person." Jamal nodded slowly. "I think that's how I knew you'd really healed." Ethan looked surprised. "Why?" "Because your happiness is no longer depending on someone else's decision." Those words stayed with Ethan long after Jamal left. Healing had quietly changed the questions he asked. He no longer wondered, "Will I ever get another chance?" Instead, he wondered, "Am I living in a way that honors the lessons I've been given?" The difference was profound. One rainy afternoon in Boston, Emily visited the elementary school where she had spent nearly 20 years teaching. Although she now traveled often as an author and speaker, she still volunteered every Friday afternoon. As she walked through the familiar hallway, a young teacher approached. "Ms. Monroe?" Emily laughed. "You don't have to call me that. I've always wanted to thank you." Emily looked puzzled. "We've never met." "No. But I was one of your students." Emily blinked. The young woman smiled. "My name is Sophie." "You taught 4th grade. You used to tell us something every Friday." Emily searched her memory. What was it? Sophie smiled. The strongest people are the ones who make others feel safe. Emily's eyes widened. I said that? You did. The young teacher laughed. I've written it on the wall of my classroom. Emily felt tears gathering. It was remarkable how far a single sentence could travel. One child, one classroom, one generation. Perhaps that was how hope moved through the world. Quietly, without asking for recognition. One act of kindness at a time. That evening, Ethan locked the doors of the community center and looked back one last time before heading home. At the same moment, Emily switched off the lights in her classroom after helping students prepare a kindness project for a local nursing home. Neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring. Neither expected life to surprise them again. But somewhere beyond what either could see, time was preparing one final gift. Not a second chance. Not a rewritten past. Something far more valuable. The peace that comes when two people discover they have finally become the people they once hoped they could be. 3 years passed after the conference. Life settled into a gentle rhythm neither Ethan nor Emily had tried to force. Ethan continued leading the Carter Mentorship Initiative, though he often insisted the name belonged to every volunteer who walked through its doors. Emily's second book, The Letter We Never Send, touched millions of readers across the country. Its message was simple. Some conversations are completed face-to-face. Others are completed within the quiet chambers of our own hearts. One crisp October morning, Ethan was helping Caleb interview new volunteer mentors when his phone vibrated. The number was unfamiliar. Mr. Carter? Speaking. My name is Rebecca Lawson. There was a brief pause. I'm an attorney in Boston. Ethan assumed it concerned one of the conference organizations. How can I help you? I'm calling regarding Emily Monroe. The room seemed to grow very still. Ethan stepped into the hallway. Is she all right? Rebecca's voice was gentle. I'm very sorry to tell you. Emily passed away peacefully last week. The words landed without sound. For several seconds, Ethan couldn't speak. He leaned against the wall. Outside, teenagers laughed on the basketball court, unaware that time had just divided itself once again. I'm sorry, he whispered. She had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia 18 months ago. Ethan closed his eyes. I didn't know. Very few people did. Rebecca continued carefully. Emily chose to keep her illness private, except for close family and friends. Silence settled between them. Then the attorney said something Ethan never expected. She asked me to contact you. He frowned. Me? Yes. She left instructions that after her funeral, I was to deliver a package to you personally. Ethan looked toward the gym. His voice was barely audible. I'll come. 2 days later, autumn rain welcomed Ethan to Boston. He stood outside a quiet law office overlooking the harbor. Rebecca Lawson greeted him warmly. Thank you for coming. He nodded politely. I almost didn't. I understand. She led him into a conference room where a single wooden box rested on the table. Beside it lay a sealed envelope. Rebecca smiled softly. Emily prepared this nearly a year ago. Ethan stared at the familiar handwriting on the envelope. It simply read, for Ethan. Rebecca continued. She told me something I'll never forget. Ethan looked up. She said, if he comes, it won't be because he's trapped in the past. It'll be because we've both finally found peace. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. Rebecca quietly excused herself, leaving him alone. For several minutes, he simply looked at the envelope. Then he carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dear Ethan, if you're reading this, then life has carried us farther than either of us imagined. Please don't be sad for me. I've lived a beautiful life. I loved deeply. I laughed often. I found meaningful work. And I was surrounded by people who reminded me every day that kindness is worth choosing. Ethan smiled through tears. Her voice seemed alive inside every sentence. He continued reading. There is something I want you to know. I forgave you many years ago, not because what happened became acceptable. It never did. I forgave you because I refused to let one painful day become the author of the rest of my life. He paused, wiping his eyes. The next paragraph was underlined. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. One heals the heart. The other requires rebuilding trust. Sometimes life gives us both. Sometimes it gives us only one. Both are enough. Ethan took a slow, trembling breath. She had spent her life teaching others. Even now, she was still teaching him. He unfolded the final page. At the conference, I saw something I had prayed for many years earlier. I saw a man who had done the difficult work of changing. Thank you for proving that people are not imprisoned by their worst mistake. Thank you for choosing responsibility every day afterward. I hope you continue helping young men understand what healthy love looks like. That may become the greatest legacy either of us leaves behind." At the bottom of the page was one final sentence. "And when you visit Chicago's lake again someday, smile. We both made it. With gratitude, Emily." Ethan folded the letter carefully. For a long time, he simply sat in silence. Not broken, not empty, just profoundly grateful. Sometimes the greatest gift one person can leave another isn't another chance. It's the certainty that their life mattered, that their growth mattered, that love, even when it could not continue as a relationship, had still changed the world for the better. As Ethan lifted the small wooden box from the table, he noticed a brass plaque fixed to its lid. It bore a single sentence. "The strongest people are the ones who make others feel safe." He smiled through his tears. The lesson that had shaped Emily's life would now accompany him for the rest of his own. And for the first time since the wedding day that never became a marriage, his tears were no longer born from regret. They were born from gratitude. A week after returning from Boston, Ethan drove to the place he had avoided for 13 years. Lake Michigan stretched endlessly beneath a pale autumn sky. The water rolled gently toward the shoreline, carrying fallen leaves that danced across its surface before drifting away. He parked his car and began walking along the familiar path. Every step awakened another memory. The bench where he and Emily had shared coffee on their third date. The small pier where he had nervously admitted he was in love with her. The quiet stretch of shoreline where they had once planned to take their wedding photographs after the ceremony. Back then, they had imagined a photographer capturing their first moments as husband and wife while the sun settled over the water. Life had written a different ending. Yet, somehow, standing there now, it no longer felt like a place of loss. It felt like a place of truth. Ethan sat on the old wooden bench overlooking the lake. He opened the small wooden box Emily had left for him. Inside were only 3 things. The conference name badge she had worn the day they met again, a smooth white stone, and a folded note. He unfolded it carefully. "I found this stone years ago while walking along this lake. I kept it because it reminded me that water can smooth even the roughest edges. Not quickly, not easily, but faithfully. Healing often works the same way. Emily." Ethan turned the stone over in his hand. Years of waves had polished it until every sharp edge had disappeared. It had not become weaker. It had become gentler. He smiled. "So did we," he whispered. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. "Excuse me, sir." Ethan looked up. A young couple stood nearby. The man held a camera. "We were wondering." The woman smiled shyly. "Would you mind taking a picture of us?" Ethan stood. "I'd be honored." The young man handed him the camera. "My parents were married here. So, we thought it would be a nice place to celebrate our engagement." Ethan looked through the camera lens. The couple stood close together, not posing perfectly, simply smiling at one another. "Ready?" Ethan asked. The young woman laughed. "We are." He pressed the shutter several times. "One more." They leaned their foreheads together. The photograph captured not perfection, but tenderness. As Ethan handed the camera back, the young man smiled. "Thank you." Before they walked away, Ethan said quietly, "May I give you one piece of advice?" "Please." He looked at them both. "There will be days when you disagree. There will be days when you're tired. There will be moments when one of you feels misunderstood." The couple listened carefully. "In those moments, remember that the person standing in front of you is not the problem. The problem is the problem. Face it together. Never each other." The young woman smiled. "I don't think we'll ever forget that." "I hope you don't." As they disappeared down the path, Ethan realized something. Years earlier, he had come to this lake believing he had nothing left to offer. Now, he had just passed forward the very lesson that had taken him years to learn. Perhaps that was how healing multiplied, one conversation at a time. Later that afternoon, Jamal joined him at the lake. He sat beside Ethan without saying a word. After several quiet minutes, he asked, "You saw her letter?" Ethan nodded. "I did." "How are you?" Ethan looked across the water. "I miss the possibility." Jamal frowned. "What do you mean?" "I don't miss hoping we'd get back together." He smiled gently. "I let go of that years ago. What I miss is knowing there's one more kind person in the world." Jamal looked down thoughtfully. "I think there still is." Ethan turned toward him. "How?" Jamal smiled. "Because everything she taught. You teach. And everything you taught me. I'm teaching the boys who come after me. He laughed softly. Kindness doesn't disappear when people do. It keeps traveling. Ethan looked back at the lake. Emily would have loved that answer. Months later, the Carter Mentorship Initiative opened a new reading room. The shelves were filled with books about leadership, communication, courage, and healthy relationships. At the center of the room stood a small framed photograph. Not a portrait, not a wedding picture. It was a photograph of Lake Michigan at sunset. Beneath it hung a simple plaque, dedicated to Emily Monroe, teacher, author, friend. She reminded us that the strongest people are the ones who make others feel safe. Teenagers often asked who she was. Ethan always answered the same way. She was someone who changed my life. He never offered more details. He didn't need to. The lesson mattered more than the story. Years passed. The mentorship program continued to grow. Emily's books found their way into schools, counseling centers, libraries, and homes across America. Teachers quoted her. Parents shared her ideas around dinner tables. Young couples read her chapters together before marriage. Her words reached people she would never meet. One spring afternoon, Ethan watched Jamal lead a workshop for new mentors. He smiled quietly. The young man no longer needed guidance. He had become a guide himself. Ethan realized his own work was nearly complete. Not because every problem had been solved, but because others were now carrying the work forward. That evening, he walked once more to the lake. The same bench waited. The same water rolled gently toward the shore. The same breeze carried the scent of spring. He reached into his coat pocket and removed Emily's final letter. He read the last sentence one more time. We both made it. He folded it carefully, looked toward the horizon, and smiled. Not because life had unfolded the way either of them planned. It hadn't. Not because every wound had disappeared. Some scars remained for good. He smiled because they had refused to let pain become their identity. Emily had transformed heartbreak into wisdom. Ethan had transformed regret into responsibility. Together, though apart, they had changed lives they would never even know. Perhaps that had always been the greater love story. Not two people who found their way back to each other, but two people who found their way back to themselves. And in doing so, left the world gentler than they found it. Thank you for spending this journey with us. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. What lessons stayed with you the most? Was it Emily's courage to choose self-respect? Ethan's willingness to accept responsibility? Or the reminder that real love is measured not by perfect moments, but by the safety, kindness, and respect we offer one another every day? If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and share it with someone who may need a reminder that while we cannot change our past, we can always choose the person we become tomorrow. Until next time, take care of your heart, and be the reason someone feels safe enough to believe in love again. As we come to the end of Ethan and Emily's journey, I'd love to hear from you. If you had been in Emily's place, could you have forgiven Ethan? And if you had been in Ethan's place, what lesson would have changed your life forever? Share your thoughts in the comments below. One thoughtful comment might encourage someone else who is learning to heal, to forgive, or to become a better version of themselves. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. Here, we believe every great love story should leave us not only entertained, but wiser, kinder, and more hopeful than when we started. And if you know someone who needs this message, that one mistake doesn't have to define a lifetime, that forgiveness is powerful, and that true love is built on respect, trust, and emotional safety, please share this story with them. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Until our next story, remember this: the strongest people are not those who never make mistakes. They are the ones who take responsibility, choose growth, and make the people they love feel safe. Take care, God bless, and we'll see you in the next story.